Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the members of the gallery. Thank you for taking the time to come and join us today. We have to make sure that everybody's aware of where the emergency exits are, and also that this meeting is being video taped, recorded, and broadcast. So that's why we all have our good clothes on. Just to remind members of council that disclosure of pecuniary interest can be made now or at any time throughout the meeting, and also a written notice has to be provided to the clerk. If required, we will break at 10:30 for 10 minutes, and also to advise that Sharon Martin is absent with notice. So this time, I'd like to ask for council to approve the agenda of session 4-2020 as circulated. Moved by Manctolo and seconded by Creelman. Yes?
Just to indicate, I have 6 notices of motion for the end of the meeting, as well as a request for an in-camera session on potential legal matters and identifiable personnel.
Okay. So we will go in camera then at the end of our agenda. And so with, yes.
Your Worship, if you're going to go in camera, I do have a follow-up to last council meeting for in-camera session regarding bylaw enforcement.
Okay.
So I'll add that if that's where you're going. So.
Yeah. Okay. So all in favor? Carries? And next, the approval of the previous minutes from session 3-2020 as circulated. Moved by Nix and seconded by Creelman. Any comments or concerns? Seeing none then, all in favor? Carries. So at this time, we have a proclamation. It's called Flight of Monarchs Day. Whereas monarch butterflies are one of the most iconic and cherished insects in North America, their epic 5,000-kilometer migration from eastern Canada to the forests of central Mexico begins in late August each year. In 2013, the eastern population of monarch butterflies dropped by 95%, the smallest recorded population since the mid-1990s. Since 2013, the population has rebounded, thanks in part to the collective efforts of thousands of individuals, groups, and communities across Canada. But the monarch's future remains in serious peril. Flight of the Monarchs Day is an opportunity to celebrate the growing movement to protect monarch butterflies and the astonishing phenomena of their migration as their epic journey southward begins. Therefore, I, Mayor Laura Ryan, do proclaim August 22nd, 2020 as Flight of the Monarchs Day, and it's dated in council on this 10th day of March 2020. So at this time, there he is. I'd like to ask council to come in front of the desk with me so that there can be a picture. And so the next item is public question period. If anyone has a question, yes, please come forward, state your name and address.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Bob McRae, 23 Blue Heron Drive. Also, for the record, if we could include this in the minutes, the chair of the town's Planning, Environment, and Natural Heritage Committee. My question is regarding your item here, 5, number 2, fill bylaw. Given that the Director of Planning has given you a recommendation that is against the recommendation the Planning Committee gave you, and the fact that the draft minutes, I should say, of the Planning Committee February 25th meeting on the Phil bylaw were not included in the agenda for today's meeting. Those two facts, many residents I know are here today and have questions about the Phil bylaw issue. So my question is, will they be allowed to discuss this when that item 5, number 2, comes up, when you deal with it? Or should they come forward now during public question period and ask questions or make comments on that?
I think we'll wait until we have that item come forward, and then it makes it easier to have that exchange.
I agree with you, but I just wanted to
Yep.
clarify that. So thank you very much.
Okay. Is there other questions from anybody in the gallery? Seeing none, then, we will carry on. We have a delegation, opposition to Dufferin North Peel Anglers and Hunters Club expansion. And welcome, gentlemen.
My name is Joe Wilson. I've been a member of the Dufferin North Peel Anglers and Hunters for 47 years, I guess, heading for 48. I've lived 6 houses away from the club for, as of March the 4th, 46 years. And we learned of it says on expansion of the club, it's actually expansion of the rifle range, which is at the present time 6 shooting lanes, to a building of 30 by 72 with 16 lanes. And obviously our concern was, you know, the noise impact that this would have on the residents of that to the north and northwest of the club. So I'll turn it over to Arunas Kalanauskas, our neighbor, who's an engineer, and he's got a PowerPoint.
Actually, I'm a scientist, but we won't deal with that. So we are concerned, but just understand that we appreciate the time to present our thoughts to council. And we just want to let you know of the background. The background of the club, at least from our position, is that it's been there long before we moved there. And we understood, most of us understood, moving there to the community, that club was there. And so to date, our understanding is that there's trap shooting at 10 a.m. On Sundays, Sundays at 10 a.m. and Thursdays at 11 a.m. and in the summer on Monday nights. The rifle and handgun range is open daily, and Sundays there's a restriction to only start after 10 a.m. in the morning. The Hunters and Anglers Club is a club that's been in the community for a long time. Members of the club are conservationists in general. They do good things. Their website indicates that they actually donate to conservation causes, which is great. Over the last 5 years, they've expanded, I guess, the trap shooting. They've created a bigger berm for that purpose. And the rifle range has been an active thing going for many, many years. The big concern of ours, I guess, part of the concern is the increase in members in the last few years from 300 to 350. So with increased members, there's obviously increased activity, more things going on. The whole idea of, from our understanding of the rifle and range, was for hunters to line up their sights to ensure that their sights are lined up for hunting, which is a great thing. And that activity is quick and easy. Not being a hunter, I don't know, but Joe here is an active hunter, and he would understand that process. But our concern is if you expand from 6 lanes to 16 lanes, obviously the impact noise could be detrimental to the actual town's bylaws. So the town has a bylaw, noise bylaw, that indicates that we are to be able to preserve and live in peace and tranquility and everything, understanding that is a rifle range there. However, it continues, the noise bylaw continues to identify that we are to be able to live in a non-degrading quality. And that, I guess, is the concern. Is the expansion of the range going to degrade our quality of life in the neighborhood? We have presented a letter to council, actually 2 letters, one being of concerned citizens, a group of 42 with 42 signatures, the other being a letter from a specialist that we had presented, and I'll explain that in a minute. This is an image from Dufferin County website that identifies the parcels, lot parcels, and the greatest concern based on our understanding of the noise bylaw and the new provincial regulations on noise is that 200 meters away from the actual rifle range. And that is right across the street on Blind Line there. And I'm just giving you reference of distances. And sound travels much farther than those distances, but just to give you kind of a relative sense of where people are situated. So we asked Dr. Colin Novak, he's a professional engineer, he's the owner of Acoustic Engineering Limited, to give his comments on what his thoughts would be with regards to this expansion of the rifle range. And he was very factual, and we presented a letter to council on that, that he has written. And he mentioned that the current bylaw is with the old regulation. There's a new regulation that the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks has put out. It's NPC 300, and we will comment on both. The main concern is the impact noise, as I mentioned, impulsive sound, to be exact. And the current bylaw indicates that there's 70 dB AI limit, but the actual bylaw indicates that it can't exceed. So if the rifle range was there before January 1st, 1980, which it was, and it had the rifle range, therefore the actual current noise limit is the limit that rifle range can have in the future. So depending on measurements, acoustic measurements that are taken, it has to be, it cannot increase. If that rifle range is to expand, they can expand to 100 lanes as long as the actual impact impulsive sound does not increase from its current levels. That is allowed. But it is not allowed.
Can we ask questions?
For sure.
Yeah, I read that letter, and to be honest, it's not easy. When you say
I agree.
cannot exceed the current levels, I mean, one gunshot makes a certain amount of noise. When you say cannot exceed, do you mean that one gunshot cannot exceed the 70, or there can't be 2 gunshots? Like that, I don't understand the difference. When you say exceed, which one do you mean?
Very good question, and I would allow an expert to answer that. It's my understanding, not being an expert, but I believe an expert needs to answer that question, not being an expert. So it's,
Is the answer in this letter? Because I
Yeah.
tried to understand that, and I'm,
Well, if you read the regulation, it's, you need an expert to analyze the regulation. My understanding is that impulsive sound is a measure of whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 at the same time. It's that impulse. So it's that impulsive sound that's measured that cannot exceed that 70 dBAI.
so do you mean, when you say exceed, then you mean 2 gunshots going off at the same time? Is that?
1 or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever the number, cannot exceed the 70 dBAI.
Yeah, I'm not, okay, sorry, you continue, because.
But again, I'm not an expert.
I'd just like to pursue this, I think Fred's got a good point.
Yep.
Mike?
Just like to pursue this, because I think Fred has a good point there. Is the problem that when you get coincidental gunshots, and like 2 or 3 or 4 happening at the same time, so obviously the sound level is higher than with a single one? That's the problem?
Correct.
And if we have 16 lanes, there's more chance of having coincidental shots than if you have 6. Thank you.
Okay, good, I'm glad you asked that, good. I think I understand a bit better now.
So,
If I may, and my understanding of the decibel range, it's exponential. So the difference between 70 and 80 is actually quite dramatic, as an example. So anything that exceeds 70 is significant because it's measured exponentially. Am I correct in that?
yeah, it's a logarithmic type mean, and that would indicate it's exponential.
And can I just ask one more? There's, and I should go back to the noise bylaw, except it uses phrases like at point of reset, I forget the exact wording. What distance are we talking about? I mean, if you were standing beside a rifle, that's one thing. You showed a map with 200 meters. Is the noise bylaw violated if we measure the noise standing by the rifle or at some distance from it?
I measured 200 meters to the closest resident, so that would be that impulse receptor would be the closest resident. Okay, so it would be at the 200-meter point.
Reception or whatever the exact wording is
Correct.
in the noise bylaw.
Just to indicate that that 70 decibel level is what the current noise bylaw indicates, but that's a limit, but that's a written limit, but in actual fact, it's whatever the current noise is that's coming from the rifle range cannot be exceeded. It's not, if it's 50 that the current rifle range is producing, then 50 is the limit for any expansion. Is that clear? So just by expansion, one would think that the actual sound or noise, that impulsive sound, is going to increase, which is a concern, and that's why we're presenting this today. Just to conclude, and happy to answer more questions, we believe that that expansion could cause concerns to us in terms of residents. So in conclusion, there's three things. One, not to approve expansion of the rifle range. Second is, if you are considering approval, then that there be measurements, scientific measurements by qualified engineers with a report that would present to council the findings. And 3 is, if that proceeds, we'd love to be part of that measurement process, just to observe it, not to interfere at all, just to observe.
John?
This is a question more for staff. Is a municipal approval necessary for this expansion to occur, thus enabling the issuance of a building permit?
So to your question, Deputy Mayor Creelman, there's some consideration on behalf of the club to replace the existing lane area. I'm not sure what's there, I haven't been on the site at this point, which is open air, from 6 lanes to 16. And that would be a replacement of the structure, which would, I believe, would be subject to site plan control because it's OS zoned.
So we could impose, at a minimum, we could impose conditions as part of a site plan exercise.
We can impose conditions that are applicable and allowable under the Section 41 site plan control legislation, yes. In other words, to say if there's other, and there is other regulatory regime that applies, given the nature of the operation, provincial or federally, that may also apply. I just don't know if it can be captured necessarily or directly through site plan control.
And has the club approached us? Have there been any discussions with the club about this?
Yes, there was a preliminary plan submitted by one of the members, Mr. Hutchinson. He's not on the board, I believe, but they would need a submission that would go through site plan. Ultimately, they would need a municipal approval and then quite likely a permit. I just don't know yet if there's, what they want to do as a structure is captured under Ontario Building Code legislation at this point. It could very well be.
And you say it's an open-air structure. I'm unfamiliar.
Current one is apparently, but the proposed one would be more sheltered, so I don't know if it's, I haven't seen any final plans yet or preliminary plans, but it would be more weather friendly.
I'm more concerned about the noise than the weather.
Oh, no doubt.
And the acoustical baffling, if that is required, and whether we are in a position of insisting on that if this thing goes ahead.
So we'd have to look at the nature of the structure. Obviously, one side of it would have to be open because they're shooting down range. I'm not sure what the nature of the form of that particular elevation of the structure would be, but obviously there'd have to be some opening for the obvious reasons. But the rest of it, if it's going to be enclosed, we can look at those matters.
I just, and I don't know if I speak on behalf of the rest of council, I just don't want to wake up one morning and municipal approval has been granted and they go in to get their building permit and we're, behind the 8 ball.
So because it's subject to site plan control, that agreement would come forward to council for their consideration before it's, any agreement would be executed.
Mark?
Just to add to David's comments, as council's aware, with the stuff I've already provided to you in the past, the Anglers and Hunters Clubs are federally and provincially regulated by the chief firearms officers at both of those levels. I'm not aware of anything that precludes us in going through a site plan approval process for these. So, and I just to caution, because they are regulated at 2 tiers above us as well, so.
Ralph?
David, as we get ourselves educated a little bit more on this, we've heard that the prohibiting sound level is not 70 dB, but it's what is currently coming from the site. Is that your understanding too?
Sir, can you repeat your question? The current maximum sound level?
Let's say the current sound level is 53 rather than 70, so suddenly 53 becomes the current, the acceptable level. I think that's what you're suggesting. Is that your understanding?
I have not at this point seen what federal prescription applies with respect to emanation of sound. So if they're limited to an upset limit, decibel limit, they'd have to comply with that. If that's going to change, Mr. Hutchinson is pursuing that with his CFO as to whether there'd be a higher level of sound. So at this point in time, I don't know that there actually would be. Even though there's 16 lanes, it depends on how it gets queued to the slots, right?
It really is about what is the maximum allowable sound, and the gentleman suggested that it's not 70, but it's what the current sound level is. And I don't think we've ever applied that before in our noise bylaw that I'm aware of, so I'm asking for clarification on that.
I don't have a pat answer for you at this time because they haven't given me that information.
I was just going to say, it's kind of an unfair question to Dave. He's not a noise engineer. We have a noise engineer we can rely on when these documents are submitted and can be reviewed accordingly. We're certainly aware of the comments that have been raised by the residents and their noise consultant. and so will the anglers and hunters be aware of those concerns. But I think as a basis for site plan approval, if that would be an appropriate report to have filed with, to have filed and peer reviewed with any application on this property.
Just to follow up, so we have not received a site plan application at this point. There was just a preliminary survey showing a concept of where the existing 6-lane slot structure, if it is that, I haven't been on site yet, would be replaced with a 16 or up to 16 slot structure. And of course, as part of an actual complete application, they would have to, provide us with what current regulation they're subject to, and if they're federally or provincially. I believe it will go through the provincial CFO, actually, and then what changes they want to make. So that would be part of a report submitted and accompanying a site plan application. So we just have not seen that yet.
Through the mayor, do you know what the current sound level is?
No, we don't. We didn't do any measurements. Well, that's why we're asking for the measurements to be done, to know what the current levels are, so that those are not exceeded.
That was exactly the line of questioning or the issue that I wanted to address, is whether or not as a municipality we have been taking measurements to know what the current level is. And I don't want to rely on anyone else's measurements. I want our own sound engineer to take those measurements so that we have a baseline.
Did you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I looked up the Center for Hearing and Communications out of New York City, and it says that a shotgun produces 170 decibels of sound, a handgun 166, and a rifle 163. So by definition, all three of those instruments are, if you were standing beside them, would be exceeding the noise bylaw. What I don't know is what it sounds like at 200 meters when you shoot that. And my suspicion, not that I'm an expert, but I've been in situations before where, say, truck noise or motorcycle noise, and it gets very delicate in terms of the environmental conditions as to when you make that measurement. But I guess my understanding is, David, if they do need site plan approval, is one of the conditions that we can impose being that they have to hire a sound engineer to make these measurements? Can we tell them they have to do that?
I don't see why not at this point in time. I mean, we've had noise reports submitted as part of a site plan application before, and we've peer-reviewed reports as well, or required a peer review.
By the way, it also says a lawnmower is something like 120 decibels of sound, and I'm sure some of our subdivisions, when you're using your lawnmower, you're probably breaking our noise bylaw. Leaf blowers.
Yes, Mike?
Just to clarify for Councillor Nix, I think it wouldn't be a condition of site plan approval. I think it'd be a precondition to the application even being considered by council.
Sorry.
Just in terms of that measurement, it's the impulsive sound. So it's that the lawnmower idea or the truck, it's kind of this baseline noise. It's the impulsive sound that is the real challenging aspect, and that is measured, my understanding is it's that logarithmic mean over time. So that requires some special measurement devices and some critical accuracy.
Okay. So we do have some members of the Hunters Anglers Club here and had asked if they could make some comments. So if you would be able to come forward and use the microphone so everybody can hear. And if you can put there, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mayor Ryan and members of council, for allowing us to address this issue and provide some clarification, hopefully. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Ian McFarland. I am the chairman of the Range Building Committee, Proposed Range Building Committee. And this is Dale Crucial. He's our range chairman for TRAP and other activities at the club. I was appointed the committee chair of this Range Building Committee last September. And the range building that presently exists is an enclosed structure. It was built in the early 1970s, and as such does not meet any current accessibility standards or the requirements of the membership. The committee was provided the direction to prepare a feasibility study to upgrade or replace this existing structure to provide the membership with a modern facility. The design criteria we were given was safety, accessibility, sound mitigation, environmental such as ventilation and lighting, security, and of course to come in within a budget. The final design has to be approved by the Credit Valley Conservation Authority, Niagara Escarpment Conservation Authority, local zoning and bylaws. It needs to have building permit application if it requires one for from the town of Dufferin. It has to be approved by the Chief Firearms Officer of Ontario for range safety, based on the completed design and a site plan. And it has to adhere to all federal regulations, which, as mentioned, include that 70 dB limit, since this range was constructed prior to the regulations being changed. After which, the club executive has to approve the design and the budget, and it goes in front of the general membership. So it's a long process. It's not simply, we're going to start building this thing tomorrow. The committee, after weighing all the requirements, decided that a building footprint of around 70 by 30 feet would be the maximum size required. That 30-foot depth would allow us to have the accessibility and safety zones and space for possible additional interior acoustical control measures. This dimension is being used as a footprint on our draft plan. Draft only, and this plan has been submitted to CVC, which they approved, and a draft copy has been sent to the town of Mono for a discussion on zoning and setbacks. At this point, we do not have a completed building design. This information I just gave you was presented at one of our monthly general meetings, and those meetings are open to all members and guests. Then the maximum number of shooting benches was discussed as being 3 to 4 per range, maximum of possibly 12 to 16. This, of course, would be dependent on configuration, and it was also made abundantly clear at this meeting that these numbers are preliminary only and would be dependent on many factors, including accessibility to the benches, and this would all have to be clarified in the final design stage. The purpose of the shooting ranges, as pointed out, are to ensure that firearms are properly aligned with their sights prior to hunting seasons. There are 3 distinct ranges at the Hunters and Anglers Association, which are 25, 50, and 100. These are most typically used to align different types of firearms dependent on the individual hunting season. The result is that we have seasonal overcrowding at one range, while the other one may be left completely empty. Additional space at each one of these distances would alleviate this issue. It was also clarified by the range director at this meeting that since each member was required to sign in and out, it was fairly straightforward to track the number of members, including their arrival and departure time using the range. It was deemed very unlikely that the proposed range expansion would be utilized at anything beyond 50%. So someplace around the 6 or less that we use now. And that would only be at these high times during the hunting seasons. At other points in time, we've tracked as little as 0 use during the day, 1 member, 2 members. The usage is certainly not there. The members were also reminded at the conclusion of this meeting that this is a draft only, and there is a long way to go and many opportunities for them to provide their input. It should be also noted that in our bylaws, any 2 members can present a motion for consideration, and any member can discuss anything that's on the floor. It should be noted that 2 of the signatories of this letter of complaint are club members and have chosen not to exercise that option. In response to their previous presentation, They had written down that a member found out the club was looking to expand from 6 to 16 lanes. And this would have you believe that this was all being concealed and somehow a member discovered our secret plans. The author of this complaint was present and participated in the meeting at which it was discussed. The fact that we've increased our membership from 300 to 350 in the past 5 years would have you believe that we're increasing at an alarming rate and that these members are all shooting. Many of our members do not shoot and simply participate in fishing, archery, camping, and other activities at the club. The previous increase from wherever we were up to 300 was in the early 2000s. And I would expect that the population of this area has grown by much more than 15% in the last 20 years. The fact that apparently 3 times the number of rifle pistol ranges is going to indicate a 3-fold increase in shooting. It's stating an unsubstantiated possibility and anticipating a problem that doesn't actually exist. The report given by Dr. Novak is opinion, and I don't claim to be any expert. However, I have spent numerous hours researching acoustical data and methods of noise reduction on shooting range. This report, other than confirming the 70 dB limit that we are required to adhere to, provides little. There was no site inspection, there were no measurements taken, and then the closing line of, "I trust the information meets your requirements," would indicate that the conclusions were predetermined by the requester, and it was written to fit that purpose. The petition, I've read the petition, and I must say, if I was presented that, I would have signed it myself, because it states, do you adamantly oppose an expansion of the rifle pistol ranges that would be certain to affect my peace and tranquility? Yes, of course. That's not what we are here for, and that's not what this club is all about. If the question had been posed, do you agree, proposed rather, that do you agree that Dufferin, North Peel Anglers and Hunters should modernize and upgrade their rifle pistol range for safety, accessibility, and to reduce the acoustical signature? I'm sure we would have had the same people sign it. Our association has been a member of this community since the early 1930s. It supports all local activities, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Guides, Get Out of Doors, and other programs. As any good community organization, we respect our neighbors. And we are certainly not insensitive to the sounds that we create. The proposed modifications to the shooting range will improve the safety and provide accessibility while allowing the incorporation of modern acoustical design methods to minimize the impact on the surrounding properties. And with that, I was going to pass it over to Dale. Dale's got some sound studies that we've taken over the last periods. We've continued to improve these ranges, modernize it. As you saw from the layout, there's been much improvements done to the west, to the east rather, and to the north. And with these changes, we'll be making improvements to the east and northeast. Thank you.
Madam Mayor and honorable council members, my name is Dale Crucial and I'm a member of Dufferin Northern Peel Anglers and Hunters. Today I represent the association in the role of a project committee member. My contributions of recent relate to the task of mitigating the sound signature departing our firing range facility. Some of you may recall the berm project we, the town of Mono and DNPHA, cooperated on and the success that it's been for all concerned. We thank you for your forbearance in that protracted endeavor. To the matter at hand and the perceived concern of potential additional noise emanating from our firing range facility with the proposed renovation. While I recognize the summary of documents that Dr. Novak has compiled and that we provided here today, they appear to be incomplete in their representation in the sense that the sound level readings that are referred to are correct at 70 decibels for our facility. However, in no instance does it refer to what I understand from the RCMP documents, that those readings, the receptor point, be taken at 30 meters from the receptor point itself, which helps to define some of the questions that are regarded here, or were indicated here. In our own sampling, and I will refer to Mr. Wilson's concern, we already meet that criteria. On the day of sampling, we encountered a light east breeze, and off the end of Mr. Wilson's driveway on County Road 16 with no traffic, we were unable to record a discharge signature that broke the 70 decibel threshold. To qualify this, we concede that the instruments used were not commercial or commercially calibrated and certified instruments, but on 5 separate occasions, they all read within acceptable ranges and under similar conditions, and there were 5 different instruments used. Since our project committee was commissioned to look into the feasibility of the range house renovation, I've been experimenting with several means of sound suppression, just as Dr. Novak recommends in his letter, with varying degrees of success, but with very encouraging results. In none of my previous conversation with Mr. Wilson have any of these experiments been acknowledged, nor has he accepted the invitation to participate in any one of them. Additionally, we have been in consultation with representatives from Acoustic, a firm that has been in business for over 43 years with experience in the field and is very confident that current structural techniques and materials will enable us to meet or exceed all requirements. As to increased range use, a snapshot of current use is in order. From November the 27th of 2019 through February 17th of 2020, a period of 83 days, the range was visited on 63 of those days, and on average 1.8 persons per visit. The use during those visits was approximately an average of 45 to 50 minutes per visit, and not necessarily overlapping. These numbers are representative of approximately 10 out of 12 months, given that frequency of our members using a range for accuracy validation increases in September and October, as Ian has indicated. It can be guaranteed that under no conceivable circumstance will all current 6 or proposed 16 lanes ever be utilized all day, every day, ever.
Thank you. The primary use of the range is to sight rifles, presumably for hunting. Is that correct?
Target shooting,
Calibrate the sights.
certainly that's one aspect. I mean, it's available for target shooting and just the joy of utilizing a firearm that one owns.
Okay. And I don't know whether there's a misnomer or this goes back to the 1930s, but hunters and anglers, there are handguns involved, and that came as a bit of a surprise to me. Handguns aren't traditionally used in hunting, are they?
No.
And what proportion of handgun activity is there versus use of long guns?
Don't really have statistics for that per se. It's not indicated in any of the sign-in logs.
And finally, how many discharges are necessary to calibrate a long gun for purposes of hunting?
Depends on the individual.
How good they are at
Exactly. How good they are
calibrating?
at it.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds a little comical to say perhaps, but you might not be satisfied with 5 shots. It might take you 20, depending on how accurate an individual is in making their adjustments as well.
Okay, thank you.
On a point of order, speaking of sound levels, I just had an email from a resident who's watching on YouTube, and she says the sound levels are too low, she can't hear. Is there anything we can do about that, Fred?
I'll see. I don't know if I can fix that during the middle of a meeting or not, but we'll look into it.
I had no questions. I'm quite happy to hear that there are methods of putting some.
Because your sound isn't.
Sorry, I get mixed up sometimes with it. Anyway, I'm glad to know that you're looking at some methods of acoustical control in this structure.
Could you help me visualize what you're planning to build? What's it going to look like?
Certainly. The existing structure that's there is approximately 12 by about 36 feet in length. With a depth of 12, there's minimal space at the back. There's a shooting bench at the front that's about the depth of this desk. There's also a safety zone that has to extend 3 to 4 feet behind that, So between those safety zones and the wall is where we have a rack to store unused firearms while not in use. Leaves minimal space. There's no accessibility. One of our members who likes to go down there and has accessibility issues, and she has to be carried down there by 4 members. It's not a good situation. The existing structure we propose, and we're not sure if we're going to renovate the existing building or if we're going to build a complete new structure. A complete new structure would be the best, as we can use modern methods, insulated concrete foam, put the sound barriers in, and make it as quiet as possible, and obviously a long-lasting structure. So this structure, the depth we came up with was 30 feet approximately in depth. The reason for that is it leaves us those safety zones, but it would also allow us to pull those benches back inside the building a little bit, perhaps 5 to 10 feet, so the concussion of the discharge of the firearm would be contained within a device inside the building, or we'll put those devices externally. At the back of because of the slope of the land, we'll put the entrance at the back, approximately 5 feet above grade is what we discussed, so that we'd have room for a double door with a chairlift to one side.
So I'm trying to visualize this. Is this a shed which is enclosed on 2 sides in the back and it has a roof and is open on one side?
No, it's a complete rectangular building that's enclosed on all sides.
Okay.
On the front of the building that faces down the shooting range, there'll be an opening, 1 per range, either 1 per range of 4 by 12 feet, or individual openings in which you open that up, and that's where you place your rifle and sight it downrange.
And in a construction like this, how does the sound come out of it? This may sound a simple question, but does it come out through the walls or come out through those openings? Or
There's 2 sounds. There's the discharge of the firearm itself, in which the propellant expands, and that can create an explosive concussion that I think we've all seen TV where they're shooting and you see this ball of flame come out. That is the first noise, and the second noise is the sonic boom of the projectile as it travels downrange. And we need to contain both those sounds. The concussive sound's the easiest one to control, and the sonic boom's the other one.
the sonic boom is out there? And
It's out there.
Right. And does the direction that you face the shed have anything to do with the eventual transmission of sound to the various east, west, north, south?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the position of the shed at present is northeast,
Okay.
slightly. And probably about a dozen years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, we were mandated by our regulatory bodies to install these overshoot baffles, which are hard baffles full of non-permeable material, concrete or gravel, and they are hard surfaced. So when the firearm is discharged, the sound will hit those and reflect off. And unfortunately, the reflection angle of those baffles is approximately in line with the downrange. So a lot of that sound that should be going downrange and being absorbed by the berms and grass and material is being reflected off. And that's something we plan to address with our acoustical studies. Thank you.
So if there's no further questions from council, thank you very much for assisting us with this issue, and also to the delegation that was scheduled. And obviously, from the sounds of things, there's still a lot more work that's going to be done, and I'm sure that our Director of Planning will keep us abreast of that. And thank you very much for taking the time to inform us today.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Okay, so now we're on to unfinished business. The first one is Island Lake Family Park, the final site plan. And so, Ms. Heaton.
Excuse me. Council note that as you've requested, the final site plan for Island Lake Park is now been completed. As council requested, the tennis courts have been moved to the west somewhat. We're within 12.5 meters of the CVC boundary. We have a north-south orientation. All retaining walls have been removed from the plan, and we plan on building the tennis courts using a sloping method. We are still going to be able to take advantage of the trees for the winds. Hopefully, they will still provide a barrier to the amount of wind that we will get out there. But we are anticipating that that will be the case. In addition to that, the parking lot has been moved closer to First Line. It will accommodate 10 vehicles plus 2 accessible spots for a total of 12 spots, and it does not go past the residents' rear property or the back of their home. I think that was about it. All lighting for the pathway has been removed. There will be conduits put in underground in case council ever decides in the future that they want to install lighting, but at this time, there will be no lighting whatsoever on the pathway or in the parking lot. There will be lighting at the tennis courts.
Any questions? Okay, all right. Do you want to continue on with the parquet in Fieldstone?
The Fieldstone parquet is, as council had agreed upon a few meetings ago, we do have the location or we have put in the children's playground. There is a picnic shelter, a small picnic shelter with some seating and a pathway to the playground.
I think it's great, Kim. When I'm looking at the plan for the Island Lake Park, the blue line indicates where they're changing the grade? Is that?
Correct.
That's right. Can you just read there's 3 little things below the tennis court. I can read some of them, but I can't read, what's the first one say?
Hold on.
But bluegrass apron, is that what it says?
It says,
I can't read it.
below the tennis courts,
Yeah.
it said
Is it
soft or sloped.
sloped? Okay.
It says sloped something apron. I think it's
Okay, it's not-
Pollinator.
it's- What?
no, that one's not.
Oh,
Seed mix.
pollinator seed mix?
Yeah,
Oh, okay,
and then,
That's not what that one says.
okay. In any case, I think both plans look
Oh,
very
right.
very good.
Yeah. AODA compliant walkway. Okay. And the one is,
and then sloped
Soft.
bluegrass apron.
slope, there you go, slope bluegrass apron.
Yes, Ralph?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have 2 questions. Is there any place for storage of any equipment that the tennis people might have in the shelter, or is there any plans for that?
Yes, there'll be storage added onto the shelter. That's part of that structure that you see there.
And I've been approached by one resident of Island Lake asking about the lack of lighting. He had noticed that there are 8 spots marked for possible bollards, and his comment was that since bollards don't produce any stray lighting of any significance, and since walking out through this in the dark or riding a bike in the dark when you forgot your light could be dangerous, wouldn't it be a good idea to put these in now? And I had no answer for him except that there was some difference of opinion on council, and so I'd like to bring that up again, if we shouldn't reconsider the issue of putting in lighting now. And it's,
Well, I'm not.
I waited till John came back, because I know
That's
you
why
want to
you
respond.
waited, okay. Well, in my opinion, I would like to have the structure in place and have the use started. And then if we need to reconsider and start installing minimal lighting for safety concerns, we would address it at that time. But I do feel that this project was originally tabled with node lighting to disturb the area residents, so that's the way I look at it. John?
I'm fine with that.
I agree with Ralph that I think someday we're going to need lighting, but I agree with what Laura just said, that let's get this built, start the use, see what it's like, and if we get complaints by next year, we can reconsider the issue of lights.
So your thought would be that if we get some requests from the residents to put in lights, then we would likely go ahead with it, or give it serious consideration?
Well, we'd give it serious consideration because we, again, would have to put budget money away.
I think we have money there from the grants already, so I don't believe that money's an issue, but I think safety is. So I think from the go-get, it's the things that we've always done have had an eye on safety, and this is an issue of safety, and so I'd just like to be on record saying that I think we should do that now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so was there anything else, any comments regarding site plans?
Just to give Kim some pat in the back, thanks for pushing this along, Kim. It's been a long road. And I'm very pleased to see it. Thank you.
Okay, so if there's nothing further, we have a motion that council approves the draft site plan for Island Lake Family Park as presented in the Director of Recreation's report dated March 4th, 2020, and that staff shall proceed with the detailed design and request for proposal for both Island Lake Family Park and Fieldstone Parkette. Have a mover? Moved by Nix and seconded by Manctalo. Any discussion? All in favor? That carries. Okay, so the next item is Planning Committee Resolution of Advice, the draft fill bylaw. And our clerk did forward the minutes, the draft minutes from that committee meeting. What's that? Oh, sorry. Sorry, yes. So the pickleball markings on the tennis courts, is that a problem?
If council wants pickleball markings, we can come forward with it. It's something that was brought forward to me a couple of weeks ago by two different residents, and I told them that I would bring it forth to council for your decision as to whether or not you want pickleball lines included with the RFP.
Well, it's popular. Everybody's
It's popular. I will let, just so council knows, we do have 4 pickleball courts at the moment in Mono. All 4 are at Cardinal Woods. We also have designated times of use for those pickleball courts so that people are aware that those times are when pickleball is played as opposed to tennis. We have a great group of people that come out and play, anywhere from 10 to 20 people are showing up for those days of pickleball. The private pickleball facilities in Mono Acts, I called them, and they are getting rid of their pickleball courts. They're going towards soccer. So the pickleball courts are leaving there. I think this is one of the things that has prompted the residents to come forward and want additional courts provided by the public sector. And Headwaters Racket Club, they don't play pickleball on a regular basis.
Certainly, my understanding is that pickleball is becoming very, very popular. It's popular for the age group of all the people sitting in this room here. And not many people take up tennis after they're at my age. And so I think it's a coming thing, and we should support it. I have been approached by a tennis player to suggest that placing the lines on the pickleball court creates a problem for tennis players in that it makes it confusing for them to play the game. And that there were a couple of suggestions made for dealing with this. One is the use of frog tape, which is placed on the court each day that's assigned a pickleball, and you just place the frog tape where the lines are, and then you peel it off again. And that's one way of getting a sense of whether this is something that we want to pursue in terms of supporting pickleball. And the other option is that we designate Cardinal Woods as being the pickleball place. I have a little bit of problem with that because this is being designed here for the residents of Island Lake, and we should be able to provide the recreation that they want to use here rather than having them to go into Cardinal Lake. But I would suggest that we try the frog tape. What you do is you place markings on the court, and you can get, by the way, you can get 2 pickleball courts on 1 tennis court. And so you place markings on the court there just to identify where they are, because otherwise it's all the measurements takes the time, and then you lay your frog tape out on it. And apparently there are 3 different types of frog tape in terms of adhesion, and they can be used quite easily. I was also told that when the pickleball lines went into Cardinal Wood, so that a lot of people stopped playing tennis there. So, yeah.
Okay, so what is the wish of council? Do you want us to embrace pickleball at this location?
I'd start with Ralph's suggestion, see how it goes, and then we can build on that if necessary.
I'm fine with that. Just give council a little bit of history on the Cardinal Woods court. That's exactly how we started at Cardinal Woods, was with the frog tape. And then we went on to have a local resident who was familiar with drawing lines on courts. That resident came forward and painted the lines on himself as a volunteer for us. I agree with both sides of what you're saying, that yes, as a tennis player, and I've played on pickleball courts, it can be a little challenging to make sure you've got the right lines, but I believe that with drawing lines on of varying colors, different colors, that would certainly solve that problem. And pickleball is definitely an up-and-coming sport, that's for sure. Absolutely, we can go ahead with the frog tape. It is a bit of a challenge for the residents to have to, every time they want to play pickleball, though, bring out their frog tape. And we're talking a lot of frog tape. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe if that's the agreement, then that we try the frog tape first and see what kind of response we get. Okay? So, on to the Planning Committee resolution advice regarding the draft fill bylaw. And Mr. Trotman, did you want to start us off with this?
I'll just give you a brief introduction, Mayor Ryan. So this matter had quite a hiatus from May 2018 when a draft came forward to what then was PAC for review. There had been work through 2017 as well. My staff reports addresses that as well. And I guess with a lot of municipalities, it's, as I said at the committee, none of this is rocket science, but it's a controversial and divisive matter. And the importation of fill is certainly something that many people or many municipalities and citizens north of the GTA are concerned about. So we did have a meeting on February the 25th. There was a fair deal of dialogue, and there was a resolution from the committee, which is cited in my report. There was a lot of questions to our town engineer who's crafted the latest draft. His starting point was the work from May 2018, but of course, there's been changes required that were also acknowledged at the February 20th meeting that have to be included in what will be a final bylaw. And as companion documents, there is a handbook. Well, that was a requirement that came out of the May 29th council resolution. There's also a chart, and there's a fee schedule. I think at this point, any technical questions are probably best answered by Mr. Walls, if you care to answer any more than that.
Okay, so,
You might want to go up to the top.
Fred, did you want to start off?
Yeah, I've got some, and these are complicated. I don't mean to hog it. Maybe I'll do one at a time. Actually, the first question is a really simple one. In your draft bylaw, you have some exemptions in section, I got to flip back and forth here. Is it 2? Which is fine. I understand that. Most of those, is it section 3 or 2, whatever, section 3. Most of those exemptions are for things where there's a higher regulatory authority. I understand that. Again, this is a small question, okay? So then I get to section 4, requirements for the issuance of a permit, and 4.2, I get some more exemptions. So I'm just, why wouldn't we put all the exemptions? So for example, under 4.2, it's, I don't know, normal farm practices. That's from a higher, that's from some agricultural act, I think, or something. I just am curious, why aren't all the exemptions in one place in the bylaw?
Morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Jim Walls. I work for R.J. Burnside. I'm a geoscientist. I do a lot of work in fill and fill bylaws for a number of municipalities, and it's why David asked me to come in and work with this issue. The reason is that the exemptions are at a higher level in the first part of the exemptions are something that town has no control over. The second set of exemptions are exemptions from needing a permit. But all the other requirements in the bylaw for quality of fill, managing fill, transportation of it through the municipality still remain in effect, even though you don't need a permit.
So section 4.2 or whatever it is, then, it says you don't need a permit, but all the rest of the bylaw applies to you.
That is correct.
Okay. Can I ask a second one? Now, this is where my questions get more complicated, but remember, I'm not an expert on this stuff, and I struggled really hard to understand everything in your bylaw. So on exemptions, you exempt something that will be authorized under the Aggregate Resources Act, and I understand that. So you can have a gravel pit, and if you get your license, blah, 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 you take your gravel out. I'm more curious about, anyone who has a license under the Aggregate Resources Act is required to rehabilitate that site at some point. I don't know if that's in the terms of the original license or not. You make a comment in your rationale document that we don't have to worry too much about that in Mono because there are no large pits, I guess, in Mono that are going to be rehabilitated. I'm not quite sure, Jim, whether I agree with that. I mean, there was a couple along Airport Road. One has houses now on the east side, so it's not going to. The one on the west side, I don't know. But I'm more concerned with the one at Five Side Road in here, Ontario. If someone was to, they actually, I believe, are doing progressive rehabilitation as they go. So I don't know if that involves bringing fill in or just using the berms around the edge of the pit to level it. But my concern would be this, is what if someday, that pit did change hands recently. It's a big pit. What if someday somebody bought it, or even the current owner, and decided to bring in anything, crushed concrete, old recycled asphalt, or something like that, and use it? Would they need a permit under our bylaw, or is that rehabilitation covered by their license under the Aggregate Resources Act?
Under the Aggregate Resources Act, they have a requirement to rehabilitate the pit. Usually, it's a minimum rehabilitation for health and safety and flood control and those kind of things, so just stabilize the sides of the pit sufficiently. The Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry does not want to be in the fill business. So the importation of fill and sometimes importation is needed to get your side slopes to a safe level so you can topsoil and seed. So that amount of importation is managed under the Aggregate Resources Act under their pit license, and that doesn't involve a municipal control. Once the pit has achieved the amount of rehabilitation that the that the pit license requires. The pit license is then rescinded, and the Aggregate Resources Act no longer has control, and any application or any further manipulation of fill or manipulation of that site falls under the municipality and would show up under the Fill Act, or your fill bylaw.
Sure.
Too far. In section 4 of your rationale document, you make the point that the bylaw is tailored to Mono's needs, and you list a number of things that it's designed to do. One of the things it says is that the town of Mono wants a bylaw such that, quote, disturbances and nuisances to residents and businesses are minimized. Now, when I read that, I know you have to put nice words like that in the rationale document, but I sat there and I tried to think, what would constitute a nuisance or a disturbance? And I was thinking, would 1,800 truck trips or truckloads of fill times 2 for the trucks exiting, that's 3,600 trucks going down the 4th line past my house, would that constitute a disturbance or a nuisance? What I'm getting at is, your rationale document, it's nice and I enjoyed reading it. How do we actually implement something like that we won't have disturbances or nuisances?
Well, that's certainly something that's up to council when they pass the bylaw and how the bylaw is administered. I mean, if this municipality wants to put a 100% prohibition on the importation of fill, then that ends the issue entirely. And I know there would be sentiment in this municipality to just institute such a thing and take away this controversy. However, we just saw a presentation by an organization in the municipality that uses berms for sound suppression, and chances are in their new development, they may require thousands of loads or hundreds of loads of fill in order to create berms for a legitimate purpose. So the point of a nuisance, if you're on a road where 1,000 trucks are going by, it's certainly a nuisance to you, and that is the challenge that council would be in approving anything, of whether the benefits of having the trucks go by and causing a nuisance for you as an individual, or what you perceive to be a nuisance. Maybe you love trucks and you would think this was fantastic, and so it's not a nuisance, it's actually an enjoyment to sit out on your front porch and watch the trucks go by. I'm stretching it a little bit, but the idea of a nuisance is very much a personal thing, and when the public shows up to talk about these things, they have the various nuances of what's going on, whether they don't like the noise of tailgate banging, or they're more concerned about groundwater impacts from the importation of fill. So unfortunately, it's not a quantitative term.
So as I understand what you're saying, it's council's discretion as to what constitutes a nuisance.
Absolutely.
Okay, I had another question, and this even gets more complicated. About 3 years ago, I had a very annoying neighbor. I had a joint driveway at the exit to my property, so I had to build my own driveway. And what I want to know is whether I needed a permit under your proposed fill bylaw. Well, first of all, I have a couple of problems. So I went back up to the definition sections. I had about 6 tandem axle loads of recycled asphalt brought in. Now, you, under your definitions, get down to aggregate, and you talk about aggregate with binding material, which I think is asphalt. But then, I can't quote it without looking it up. But I think it sort of said, if you're putting it on the surface, you're okay, but not below grade, or something to that effect. Well, I had 6 loads brought in, and clearly most of those loads are below grade because I had to build the driveway up so it could meet the county road, right? Would that have put me into the situation where I would, 6 tandem axle loads is probably less than, no, it's over the 10 cubic meters, but it would still be what you call a minor site alteration, so I wouldn't need a permit. I'd be okay. What I was worried about is whether the material I was bringing in would bump me up to a higher category of permit. Now, let me, just before you answer, because this is going to get more complicated, I'd like to know whether I need that permit, but before you answer, I had to get a permit from the Niagara Escarpment Commission. They came and looked. They didn't charge a fee for that permit. The Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority wanted me to get a permit from them, which I think would have been $300 or $500, I can't remember which. but my property is regulated by the NVCA because I'm on the river. However, the director of planning there knows my house, and he knows that the top part is not in a floodplain, and so I got a clearance letter. That only cost $100. Then, because I was going onto a county road, I needed a permit from the county, and I had a very professional guy by the name of Scott Martin come out to my house and pace around and tell me the rules and regulations. Has to be so many meters from large red pine trees, which when I read your draft bylaw, and I can't find the section without going back into it, you're not allowed to harm a tree. So back to my original question, would I also have needed a permit under this fill bylaw, which would have been my fourth permit?
It all depends on what thresholds that the bylaw sets as to when you need a permit and when you need to come to council and things like that. So the way you described it, yes, the way the bylaw is written now, you would need an online permit to describe, so that the town can monitor how much fill goes into your property over time. So you would apply for an online permit that wouldn't require cost. But getting back, just before we talk about asphalt as a surface, it's a site alteration bylaw. So any alteration by volume, whether you're digging, hauling, placing, or moving, that cumulative volume is what triggers various stages of whether you need a permit or whether you need an online permit, a staff approval, or it has to come to council. And that's one thing that we kind of need some direction from council on, is what size of a site alteration would you like to see come to council, and what size would you be comfortable with the staff administering? This is a challenge in all municipalities as to what level that council wants to see it.
Okay, then just on the definitions, okay, I've got it now in front of me. Under, is it soils I'm under? You define, fill. Point 7 under that defines an aggregate. And this is the part of that definition that I was concerned about. Aggregates can either be natural or manufactured, and excludes asphalt which can be placed on surface but not below grade. Okay, I'm not sure in retrospect I understand what that means. And I was worried that because I brought in 6 tandem axle loads of recycled asphalt, and they're clearly below grade, that I was was that?
I think you're going to have to remove it all, Fred. I think so.
Start over.
The wording there was partly taken from provincial regulations, and it gets a little convoluted when we take things from other regulations. I try to align everything to what's already existing in descriptions of what topsoil is and what aggregate is and things like that. So the point is, we don't want to see people bury asphalt below final grade. So you can use asphalt for a surface treatment, but we don't want to see it buried 10 meters below surface.
What about 1 meter?
It becomes an engineering problem of using recycled asphalt as an engineered base before you put your final layer on. But asphalt is not supposed to be used, and usually it's too expensive to use as a fill material. It's a lot cheaper to get aggregate or excess soil to use as you're building up, and then use recycled asphalt and asphalt as your surface treatment. And most people do that just because of the cost difference between the materials. But ideally, you want your surface treatment in asphalt, concrete, or whatever to be just that. And the actual, what depth is it, 2 inches, 6 inches, is an engineering issue that depends exactly on what road you're doing or a bridge approachment. So you would have thicker engineered surface in certain circumstances. In other circumstances, like just the general run-of-the-mill driveway, it's only maybe 3 or 4 inches.
Well, okay. By the way, I'm finished. I'm just going to say that my comment about all the permits I needed to do that driveway could be construed in the sense that I'm thinking we don't need more regulations or laws, but I don't want it construed that way. I actually think I was quite impressed with your bylaw, and I understand, obviously, we need it.
John?
I'm going to try and keep this as basic and as simple as possible. We have two competing approaches here. One is your draft bylaw, which I find to be unduly complex and too many levels of permit, versus, say, the bylaw, which comes fairly highly recommended from Centre Wellington Township, and the bylaw that was accepted by this council on May 29th, 2018, which was before my time, which is, I believe, a two-level bylaw or permit process. In my view, I think we should be two levels. And in the case of Centre Wellington, as memory serves me right, it's 1,000 cubic meters above, 1,000 cubic meters below. I think that permits should be required for both. And the only waiver of a permit would be for something that is inconsequential, like a truckload of fill. But anything above that, we should have some regulation of through a permit process. My other concern is that there should be conditions for both levels of permit. And in that, I would refer you to Schedule F of the Centre Wellington bylaw that has some very interesting and compelling conditions that address such things as haul routes, hours of activity, no weekend or holiday movement of fill within that township, and requirements for testing and so forth. So I don't think there should be a level of permit that shortcuts on conditions. I am increasingly of the view that we should allow only fill that is sourced within Dufferin County. That, I believe, increases the possibility that we are dealing with good material as opposed to being at the mercy of fill brokers who are trying to get rid of fill from the GTA. My final observation is that I do not see anywhere where this council, maybe again this started before my time, but we have this great long letter of justification or justification document. I don't know that we ever commissioned that. We commissioned a director's handbook. I don't believe that we asked for a document that justifies what we're doing. I think we know why we're doing it, and that is justification enough. I think our current bylaw is deeply flawed and is open to interpretation, which basically lets situations occur that probably should not occur. But I'm troubled by the fact that this has become a little bit of a runaway train. And the train trip has not ended, because whatever we do, we are going to have to make changes either to your bylaw or the bylaw that is recommended to us by our committee. Right now, I'm persuaded by the recommendation of our Planning, Environment and Natural Heritage Committee.
Mr. Trotman, did you want to comment on?
Well, the rationale was an outline for those who may have not been aware or knew or not up with the current regulation. It's simply an outline of all the issues that have borne in on this particular project and many like it. I guess with respect to the current, I mean, whatever version council chooses, that will need to include current regulation, including 406/19, and that was identified also at committee.
Maybe I could just respond to the question regarding the rationale. The rationale ended up being and trying to anticipate the questions people would have. You know, the bylaw is so many pages, and there generally isn't room to put in the actual document why each section was thought of as it was, and why it was designed, and why it was laid out as it was. So the rationale document was sort of my thoughts as I went through the creation of it, and to assist people that read the bylaw. The first thing they do is ask questions about why is it this way, why was it that way. So I tried to put that all down in writing to add some assistance to people reading the bylaw.
Just on that, is that not covered off in part by what's found in the Director's Handbook?
The Director's Handbook or the guidelines, that, you know, whatever terminology you use, the guidelines are all the application and requirements and conditions that go along with anybody applying for a permit, and how the permit will be established. So things like, what's your haul route, what's your process for minimizing dust, noise, what's your process for managing soil quality, what is your process for maintaining the fill when it comes in to protect from erosion, where's your silt fences going. So any significant site alteration and fill would follow the guidelines or Director's Handbook to, when they make the application, to create all the scenario of how all the fill is going to be managed, used, and the oversight and setting securities and deposits and things that go along with that.
And a lot of that is also reflected in a well-written bylaw, would you not agree?
That's,
Unless the bylaw allows the director an inordinate amount of discretion.
the guidelines are all the details that anybody applying for a permit would like to know, such as you have to go and see the Conservation Authority, you have to get permissions if you're in an agri-escarpment, how to write the application and address all the things that the town is concerned about. So it's more the meat and potatoes of the activity of somebody applying for a permit that really has never done it before. So it's a bit of an assistance for them. It's also an assistance for town staff to look through and make sure all the issues of concern when they receive a fill application have been addressed in the application.
Well, this has gone on for quite a few years. My mile-high view of this is that it actually keeps getting better. There are still things that we look at and we can find that we'd like to change. And each of the bylaws, I put them side by side, just as Fred did, and I looked at the 2018 one and the 2020 and compared them line by line, which you could do very easily up until item 6, and then it's harder to work with. But I think that the 2020 builds on the 2018 well. I think it adds useful information, and I think the regulatory language is likely going to be very helpful if we're having another Cox or some other challenge that we need to bring the lawyers in. So although, John, it's a little more information, I think it's good information. I'd like to go to the very end, which is that diagram with all the various types of fill sizes. And initially I thought, oh, wow, there's 6 different ones there. And then when I looked at it a little more closely, I was used to the 2 one, and I thought the 2 idea was a really good one. That's 2 years ago. But really, when you take off the permit waived for the single dump truck, and you take off the one at the end, which was other, and you realize that the one for greater than 10,000 just joins in with the one that's between 1,000 and 10,000, we really end up with only 3 rather than 2. So it's not that complicated. I think we could join them together and make it just 2, but it's not as bad as I initially thought. So I'm more or less happy with it. Your Honor, I have some questions and suggestions, and I'm not quite sure how to deal with them. I'd like your guidance. I could give them to Jim, and he could just run through them and say, I like that or I don't like it, and we could comment. Is
Do
that
you
all right?
want to go ahead and ask?
And
How many do you have?
pardon, I have 7.
Maybe I could make a comment here too, is these type of bylaws are very controversial in communities, and a lot of people have different opinions on what thresholds should come to council and what thresholds should be left by staff, and whether Phil should be let in at all, and what kind of oversight and limitations should be on it. So there's a lot of concern. And when we prepared this draft, the idea was to get some input from the public or the PIAC committee, and kind of make sure that it really reflects the municipality and what the citizens of the town of Mona want. So, you know, my thoughts are the way it's sitting today is we have two different bylaws. I tried to build on the 2018, but people who worked on it indicated that they didn't feel that I reflected what they prepared well enough in their opinion. And, you know, I appreciate the thoughts, and I'd like to see a little bit of public additional public input, and create something that we have a little wider acceptance of before it comes to council to make an opinion or to make a decision on. Not really. I would say it's before a council because the committee suggested it come to council to look at the 2018 version and update it to current regulatory standards. So either way, there has to be something done with whatever template that has been presented. The 2018 is not up to date. The 2020 was, there were a lot of comments from public and the authors of the 2018 version that they didn't think that the 2020 version fully encapsulated what they wanted. So, and the director's handbook, this was the first draft of a director's handbook in two parts, a rationale and a guidelines, and there were comments that they didn't feel that we encapsulated everything that they wanted to see in it. So there's still some unhappiness in the greater world with what we have on our plate today, so I'd rather see those people sit down and go through it and trying to reach a consensus everybody's happy with.
You know, there was inquiry made at the committee meeting on February 25th about will there be, as part of recommendation, more public input. But the recommendation stands as what you have in front of you in my report on page 3, which is the 02-2020 recommendation. So that's how it came forward to council on that basis. There was dialogue about whether there would be more public input. I actually raised the question myself, whether does committee want more public input? Well, what I said is the committee recommendation resolution doesn't reflect that. It didn't reflect that, so it was made, the resolution stands as it is, which is in my report.
Your Honor, may I make my comments? All right. So the first is the question of adding under definitions. Would you consider adding topsoil to the list? We don't have a definition for that. That's one.
I believe it's, the topsoil is listed in the definitions.
Pardon?
It is listed in the definitions. Okay. There is a one for topsoil.
Okay, I couldn't find it either,
Sorry, Ralph, is it under your fill? I mean, where you have the soil, the excess soil, liquid soil, is one of those topsoil?
Just under the definitions number 1.0.
Yes.
We probably should have a clear understanding of what topsoil is there, since it's one of our more important earth components.
That's a good point. I'll have to look at that.
Right.
There's somewhere in here there was a definition of topsoil. It should be there, so it
Okay.
should be under the definition of fill.
Maybe-
Ralph, I know you're asking the question, but maybe the definition of soil encompasses topsoil. It says unconsolidated, naturally occurring mineral particles and other naturally occurring materials resulting from the never mind, I don't have to read it all.
Yeah, topsoil is a subset of soil, an important one. It's the top part, which contains all the organic materials, et cetera. So it's a very important asset, and that's why I think that under general provisions, we've got the second one there, we should add that we don't bury it.
Yeah, anybody that would be applying for a permit in the first place would have to demonstrate what they were bringing in, where they were putting it, how they were designing it, and it has to be geotechnically stable at the end of the day in order to, prevent erosion and a collapse or anything like that. So somebody applying for a permit that presented the idea of burying topsoil, that would be rejected.
They might not have that in their permit, but it just might happen. Whereas if you've got it in here that it should not be buried, I think that gives added
Absolutely.
strength.
A statement like that is quite clear.
Right. Under exemptions,
Just for clarification on that, one of the drafts from 2017 did include a definition of topsoil.
we're dealing, David, with this draft here, which you presented.
No, I'm just saying we have a definition we can,
Okay.
rely on for that
Thank you.
particular matter.
So I'm concerned about the exemption, which, if I interpret it right, would apply to somebody who had built an apartment or something, and they were doing a backfill there. And it seems to me that they're exempted from getting a permit for fill. Is that correct?
That's the way it reads, that if you're getting a permission under the Ontario Building Code, so if the chief building official issues a permit for you to do the excavation of a basement or something, that legal instrument controls whether or not you need a permit. But remember, the reason why we had, if a permit is waived, all the requirements of the bylaw still apply. So the chief building official is still, even though he may waive the need for a permit if somebody is excavating a basement or backfilling a basement from a building that's been demolished, all the requirements of the bylaw for quality of fill and compaction of fill and not burying topsoil, if we put that in specifically, are all still required to be followed. The bylaw still stands. So the chief building official could refer to the builder or whoever's doing the work, that they have to reference the requirements of the bylaw, rather than go and get an additional permit. The idea was to avoid multiple permits for the same purpose.
To be quite honest, I don't fully follow you, but I
sorry.
do trust you.
I guess the point being that
Point
if there's
being is
a
that we
legal
don't-
instrument or a legal
Yes.
control by the chief building official, we would assume the chief building official can either reference the bylaw or make whatever provisions in the building requirements for that constructor to avoid having to get a permit.
But it appears to me that in the exemptions, 3(1), B, and C, I put down D, but just B and C, that probably gives you an exemption from backfilling or altering grade as a condition of a development permit. Is that not right?
Yes. Yes. Those are specific exemptions set out in the Municipal Act.
So do we want to allow people to backfill with any fill without requiring a permit? I don't think so.
On those applications, you would ensure that it was done through the subdivision agreement process and the subdivision agreement review. What I'm saying is those are specific identified exemptions under the Municipal Act that gives you the authority with your fill bylaws. So you do have to incorporate them.
We still have control
They're
over
exempt
this.
through provincial
Right.
regulation. What I'm saying is that type of work would normally be dealt with either through a site plan control application and/or a subdivision application. You think of subdivisions, we usually have topsoil sites on properties. For grading, we get sediment control in place. We've generally not had a lot of fill ever required for any of our sites. We're usually a source, if anything.
Yeah, John?
If I could hop in here, doesn't this exemption raise the question, and I'm not going to name the particular situation so that Mark doesn't have to leave the chair, but we've had a situation recently within the town of Mono where it was deemed that our fill bylaw didn't apply for whatever reason, and I think it had something to do with the construction of a structure deemed to be acceptable by the chief building official. There are many people who argue really strongly that a fill bylaw should have applied in that instance, and the provisions of the fill bylaw should have applied, notwithstanding the fact that there were certain concessions made with regard to testing but things like the haul route, things like the hours of movement of fill and so forth, absolutely flouted the conditions of our existing fill bylaw and would flout the conditions of any new fill bylaw. So again, I come back to my point. You need a permit and you need conditions attached to that permit regardless of the situation, save and except for maybe that one truckload.
I agree, and the bylaw, the way it's designed, is the only exemptions from this bylaw are where it's prescribed by higher law. So the bylaw applies to all situation in the municipality except when Ontario law overrides it. So in all situations in the one that you described, the opportunity was either with the chief building official and the municipality, which is the chief building official, to include the requirements of the bylaw and a fill permit in that case. So the way we've laid this out, that situation would be captured here. And you would need a permit unless a chief building official said you didn't, which is essentially the municipality.
But, you know, I have a big problem with the chief building official saying that you don't need a permit. I think we either decide we need a permit or we don't. And if it's a struggle between the municipality as the chief building official versus an individual who is designated to be the chief building official for the municipality, I think the municipality wins every time.
That's the way it should work.
I don't mind do you have a suggestion, though, John, with respect to this? Do you want to include something?
I agree with you, there should be no exemption.
Okay.
Mark, did you have?
Sorry, the provision for the building code dealing with specific issues was originally put in, I believe, in 2012, when we had a prohibition, and that then the question is, well, if you were bringing in 4 or 5 truckloads for a building permit, you would be prohibited based on some of the aspects of the bylaw or more. So I think it transferred from the 2012 prohibitive bylaw into the 2014. And then what Jim is saying here is that would alleviate the concern you had on that particular application. We'd be looking at that was why we would be looking at online for under basically 10 loads, basically, the 100 meters cubed, so that we're putting people on notice that they are being regulated. We're getting the cumulative information on the building permits as well in the future under this bylaw. So that was kind of the thinking in terms of the online process and the smaller amounts is to always know where fill is going, so that if we get calls too, that we know where the trucks are running. If there is an active permit, we know what their exemption was through the online process, so.
Jim, if we top dress a lawn with 2 dump trucks, 20 cubic meters of topsoil, do we need a permit under this?
The way it reads is that if you're less than 1 dump truck, and we're using 10 cubic meters, you don't need to apply for a permit. If you're over 1, then you need to do the online permit.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter whether you're top dressing a lawn or backfilling or whatever. When you reach that cumulative threshold, then you need to go through the permit process.
All right. My next comment was, should we remove waiving from requiring a permit? And I think we've dealt with that already. The next item, and I'd like to speak to this a bit more, and John has introduced it, and that is that we would, all fill would be sourced from within Dufferin County. And the rationale for that is that we have first of all, we have a very sensitive environment in terms of the ground is, in most areas, is sand or soil, very permeable, and if we get a contamination, it's very easy for that to permeate down to our aquifers, most of which are fairly shallow. And we all know that if we contaminate an aquifer, it's contaminated, period, and there's no resuscitation. So it's a big thing. And we also, despite you being the QP, and we know that it's pretty well impossible to prevent an unscrupulous fill provider from bringing in dirty fill. Somehow or other, it's going to happen. And certainly it's happened in other places. I think it was the Durham Airport where there was just terrible in terms of what amount of dirty fill that they had in there. So the only way that, no, it's not, let me rephrase that. It's more likely that we can control for contamination if we understand the source, and it's in Dufferin County. Now, I'm not finished, Fred. There can be a problem with this, of course, and the example was the amount of fill that the hunters and anglers needed. And so I think if we included, if we made this as a condition, that it had to be sourced, all fill needed to be sourced from within Dufferin County, that we should also allow for an exemption on the basis that no fill was available, and the person had to, or the individual, or had to come to or had to come to municipal council to ask for an exemption, and that description would be included. So what I'm proposing is that we would include a condition that all fill is sourced from within Dufferin County, and that you would create the conditions that would allow an exception, primarily that fill is not available from Dufferin County. So I appreciate your thoughts on that, Fred.
Ralph and I have discussed this, and I know what he's saying. I don't disagree with his main point that if we put such a requirement in, we have a better chance of controlling the quality of the fill. But then I immediately raised a couple of problems. When I built my driveway, that recycled asphalt wasn't available in Dufferin County. I had to get it from someplace else. When the anglers and hunters put in their berm, my understanding is that was from the Eglinton subway excavation that they got. I mean, they simply couldn't have got the quantities from Dufferin. So I now that I hear Ralph explain it, that put the requirement in, but allow for exceptions, I would say, fine, I could go with that, but I would also suggest, Mr. Mankolo, that with these permits and all of them having conditions, that in fact, we could do that anyway. And in other words, the conditions could cover this possibility, that if we thought the fill was available in Dufferin County, we'd put that in as one of the conditions of the permit. If it wasn't, then fine. So maybe we come at it from two different ends and end up at the same place. I don't know.
Anybody applying for fill would have to state the source location and the quality and the transportation and the whole mechanism of how the fill would be acquired, moved, and placed. Sometimes there's a need if somebody wants to line a pond with clay and there's no clay available in Dufferin County, because Dufferin County is more of a sandy, silty soil material, then they would have to source clay from another place. So sure, we can put this in, but as you noted, that there would be the ability of having exceptions. So you're almost saying, no, but we could. So if we just leave it as it is, that the applicant has to demonstrate the source of material that is acceptable to staff and council, and regardless of where they're sourcing it, then you get to make the decision of whether that's acceptable to you.
I don't think that's restrictive enough.
Okay.
It's too open to anywhere in Ontario.
Right.
So you have to recognize how this, I'm not telling you this, but I sound like I am, how this these fill operations work, and the need to get rid of the dirty stuff. And it's very, very expensive to have it cleaned. So you do anything to dump it somewhere, the rather than take it to have it cleaned, and the money that's involved in this. So I'd like to, my concern is preserving this area.
Yeah,
Okay?
absolutely.
And I think that my suggestion moves in that direction.
And we'd have to word it in some form that it's natural soil that was derived from Dufferin County, not fill brought in from somewhere else, dumped in Dufferin County, and then subsequently re-excavated or removed. And I'm sure we can come up with language like that, and then the exception.
When fill isn't available,
Right.
you can apply to take it from another specified source.
Yep, absolutely, we can do that.
Happy with that?
Yeah, I mean,
One question, at what threshold would council want to see an application?
That's an interesting question. And partly it goes down to, as I read it, the minor site alteration, the maximum could be 200 meters squared, because it was 200 meters per hectare, and the maximum size that we're putting the fill on is 1 hectare. But then in the flow chart, you've got 350. Is there an error there?
Yes. And part of that was discussions with staff. I met with staff at one point, and we went over all this, and we were talking about what threshold should we be setting at these various levels. One, when you don't need a permit, and the threshold of where staff can approve it, and where it has to go to council. So those are the main two numbers that I would like to get some direction on, and, you know, there's a whole variety of opinions. So right now, we have 1 truckload, you don't need a permit. After 1 truckload, up to, say, 200 cubic meters, 20 truckloads, you have to go through the online process. Above that, we basically have staff to up to 1,000 cubic meters, and then above that, it all goes to council. And when we get up to the prohibited, you have to go to council first to get approval, to even make the application. So this makes it a lot easier for people that come with really big concepts, is they have to come to council and even get the concept approved for something really big before a council will even direct staff to accept an application. And this really helps your business community to know, you know, what the limitations and expectations of your municipality are. And if they have something really legit, that maybe they're building a ski hill or something, maybe they want to present the concept to council, and based on the input of the community, you decide to go ahead.
Could maybe council should discuss this right now and give Jim the input? I know you'd like to have it a single.
I'm quite happy with you basically, anything below 100 truckloads, let staff decide. Above that, it's got to come to council. That works for me.
The other aspect about the online was, part of the challenge we've had in the past is up to the 250 cubic meter exemption, there's been creep. And it became a bit of a guessing game for our bylaw enforcement officers to know, okay, no, I don't have more than 225 truckloads. Well, I think you might. Well, no, I don't. And he didn't see it go in, and so it became a bit of a guessing game. Although, you know, he has a pretty good idea of a pile of earth and fill as to how many truckloads it might be. The online system then will trigger us to know someone's making that application. We haven't set a fee yet. It may very well be free, but then we know from the get-go who's making those applications on for minor amounts. And that way, if they don't, and our bylaw enforcement officer goes out, you know, okay, you know, we'll give, you know, you may not have known about the bylaw in the online form, but you do now, that word will get out. People will know that they need to do the online form. So the first thing will be is, where's your online form? And he can go from there.
I don't have an issue with an online process for minor amounts. However, I think, number one, permits have to apply above 1 truckload as far as I'm concerned, whether they be online or not. Number two, those permits should be public information. In other words, anyone should be able to ask for a copy and see what the terms and conditions are. And number three, notwithstanding staff approval and not coming to council, I think council should be notified of those activities so that when our phone rings, we can provide intelligent answers. Well, that raises an interesting question, and that is, when do the local residents get notified of a fill activity in their neighborhood, and at what threshold? And I think we need to be mindful of that. And again, I come back to the terms and conditions, the Schedule F of the Centre Wellington bylaw, which I think is the best set of conditions that I've seen, are very clear about haul routes, times of day, number of trucks per day, that kind of thing. And I think that applies in both instances of small amounts and large amounts.
Let's move on. I've got, you've dealt with the 350 versus 200. The fees and charges document, could you look at that just to see if you can make it a little more simplified? Not right now, but I found it complex, and I guess it was complex partly because we have so many classifications of fill size, and I'm not sure we've completely dealt with that. I know John would like to have 2 fill sizes, and I think John, I'm putting words in your mouth, but you'd like to blend the less than 1,000 with the greater than, less than 10,000. Those two, so the small and the large site alterations fill amounts would be blended into one? Or what would you like?
I haven't really thought, I cite the Center Wellington bylaw because it's 1,000 below, 1,000 above. I wonder whether 1,000 cubic meters is actually a little on the high side. I don't know.
Well, to go through the large site alteration application, we don't do that with anything that's less than 1,000 at the moment, or more. I'm not sure.
Because 1,000 cubic meters, correct me if I'm wrong, is 100 truckloads.
It is.
Right.
Okay, and I think that becomes a significant neighborhood activity that, you know, I appreciate the notion of doing something online, but maybe we need to go below 1,000 cubic meters as our tipping point between a minor and a major.
Oh, no, the way it reads now is 250 and below, or 200 and below is the online. 200 to
online.
1,000 is a submission to the municipality and staff review, issue the permit with conditions, and that includes the traffic flow and whether Mike Dunmore wants to get a entrance permit on the road and that sort of thing. So that all comes through that process.
I'm becoming more malleable to the notion of 250 as the tipping point between something that's minor and something that is requiring something more detailed. But again, I think we have to be mindful of the necessity of informing neighbors, the public nature of the application and issuance process of the permits. I think those are things that we cannot disregard. So maybe I'm moving off my two levels of permits to maybe three, as Councillor Magdalo has mentioned. But I think, again, the conditions have to apply to anything above a truckload.
You put your mic on?
Thank you. So I've suggested the fee document be simplified a bit, and it would be, I think it's, I'll leave that. Under the draft guidelines, I've just got two comments. One, I don't know what ESA is, and I don't think it's defined there, or like, maybe I've missed it. You use the term ESA.
Environmental site assessment, so that's
Okay.
usually a process that's applied to the source site to determine whether the material is suitable to come to here.
If it's not there, maybe you could add that in.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I feel the hours of operation are too restrictive. If my memory's correct, it allows Phil to be brought in on Saturdays and to be brought in between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. And we have made no decisions here, but we've always considered something much more restrictive in terms of hours than that.
The way it reads right now, it's aligned with the noise bylaw.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as discussed here, anything above 200 cubic meters is going to need a permit, and in the permit, you set conditions. So there'll be some properties in Mono where, say, a farm that's coming off Highway 9 that is doesn't pass any residential homes, and then maybe they can be less restrictive. Other places, that's going to be places where school buses run, then you want to be very restrictive, especially to catch the school bus timing or something like that. Or maybe a half-load season that Mike Dunmore would be, oh, we're servicing the roads, or half-load season, or dust suppression application that you want to have control. So anything that's going to need a permit has to come to staff, and you have to submit your truck route, and then staff will review and add conditions specific to that truck route.
So if that's going to go to permit, should it be in the manual at all? Because it sounds like you're defining the times right there.
Oh, I just used the noise bylaw.
I know what you use,
Oh,
but why
okay.
why do we keep it there if it's going to be defined by the permit?
That's the minimum. Yeah, so everything is going to be either that or more restrictive. So that's the minimum restriction that would be applied, because really we can't, unless we come to council and get an improvement or exemption for the noise bylaw to run Sunday at midnight for some reason, the conditions of the noise bylaw apply.
You're still going to want hours of operations in the bylaw for the 1, 2, 5, 10 truckloads.
Yes.
Right, so you're going to need to have that in the you're going to need something in the bylaw.
Okay, so we,
Well,
Can I, okay.
sure.
I'm quite happy with the draft bylaw. I know we're going to have a motion put on the floor here, and I just want to make sure I understand something. Our motion is going to say, just paraphrasing, to accept the 2020 bylaw, the one you prepared, and send it to our solicitor for fine tuning. But from what I heard you say, you're quite open to the idea that we take this draft and have some more input or public consultation. I don't know the mechanism for that, but I'd be quite happy with that. And I also wanted to say, I'm very happy with the rationale report. Initially, when Ralph and I discussed it, I thought, yeah, why do we need it? But I think it really does lay out, not just for us, Ralph, but members of the public. I mean, we can put it on the website. It explains how we got to where we are now. So I don't know how we would do this further public consultation.
David?
To that point, the thought too with the rationale is that it can be abridged, a very abridged version actually, could then form a hard copy brochure that could be at our front counter, just so people get some cursory information if they come in.
David, do you have any suggestions from Jim's suggestion that maybe we could have, like Ralph had a lot of little small good points here, and maybe we need to put this out. Big points.
I guess the question would be, do we get a legal beagle look at it first and then have an open house or venue? Is that what you mean?
I think we have a classic legislative dilemma here, in as much as the House of Commons has passed one version of a law, the Senate has passed another, and there needs to be a reconciliation between the two. And we have two different bylaws, one recommended by our committee and the other one that is before us today. And I think there needs to be some kind of attempt to reconcile the two, because there is a lot of heated views on this. I like the idea of a public meeting. I think it's premature to send anything to a lawyer at this point without incorporating some of the issues that we've all raised here. It would just be a waste of time, because we would then have to revisit the lawyer's version and probably send it back to you, and then it would go back to the lawyer, and as I say, the runaway train ride would continue. So I'm in favor of public input. I'm in favor of an exercise to try and conciliate between the two different bylaws.
Okay, so with that offer in mind, do we need to set a time frame for that discussion to take place so that we can keep this going forward, even though it's not a train wreck yet? Just looking for,
Well, I guess we do. I don't know how to do that,
Okay.
sitting here.
Mark?
I don't know where council wants to go, just a reminder where you started the meeting with the request for the public input as well, and I just didn't want that to get lost, so.
It's really a bad thing to sit here in council and in front of the public and say you don't want a public meeting. I'm not sure that's the way to get any more input here. This has been going on for 3 years from input from many people. The public is here today, and if they want to make comments or make suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them, but I'm not sure this is the direction to go. I think that we are at a stage where we're pretty close to approving a bylaw.
Well, so my concern's the same. It's not that we don't want to hold a public meeting, but I think we need to have a substantiated document that everybody can say, this is what we are considering for public input further. So if you understand what I'm coming from, that if Jim is willing to host a meeting with a number of different stakeholders that had worked on this in previous, and maybe that there could be some understanding of how to meld the two together. So
That's what I had in mind.
that's what he had in mind. How about you, Fred?
And I guess that was sort of my thought with a public meeting is more the representatives of the public that have been involved in this for some time, that really haven't had a chance to like engage me. I've talked to some of them face-to-face, more in just a friendly discussion way rather than a sit-down venue. So if we could arrange some sort of a sit-down venue and have a table full of stakeholders, I'm sure we could get something done in fairly short order.
This is short of a public meeting, no, just a stakeholders. Yeah, so, yes, Mr. Mitchell.
Bob Mitchell, Tri-Cycle. I have two sort of questions. The first one is more in terms of the process. And I know that, Bob, you should speak into the mic.
Bob, sorry, we're going to bring you a mic.
Thank you.
Unless you're under a speaker.
Does it work here?
That's the volume control.
Is it too high?
Try that.
All right,
Yeah.
use that one. Oh, okay. I know council has been trying to encourage citizen engagement. And my question here is, you know, this process is almost 2 years, in fact, it's over 2 years old. And it's been largely put together by citizens. It's had people like Ed Krager and PIAC and you had a bylaw given to you back in May of 2018 that was, for all intents and purposes, it was almost perfect. There were, as I understood it, there were a couple of little tweaks that needed to be done and a manual to be put together. And your instructions were, let's go ahead, do the tweaks, make the manual, and let's get this thing done. I'd like to know, what has this whole process cost the township, or the town? Because we've taken what we got and we've completely replaced it. And you want citizen engagement, you're frustrating your citizens because you've got a public committee here that's recommending it. It was recommended 2 years ago. You agreed to it with some very minor modifications. And 2 years later, we don't have it. So I'd like to know, where did the process break down, number one? I'd like to know what this thing is going to cost the town. And probably the most important one, is when we get this thing done, are we going to enforce it? Because we don't seem to be enforcing it now. We've got a situation that's out of control. We can't make charges. And we have a bylaw, but we're not enforcing it. So all of this is almost it's a waste of time. But it's a waste of our taxpayers' money as well.
Thank you for those comments, Bob. One of the problems happened between May 18 and this year, or I mean, sorry, in 19, the legislative changes had to be incorporated. And in terms of enforcement, we are definitely going to be able to have a stronger handle on it with these, the verbiage, et cetera.
Madam Mayor, I think you'll find that any changes to the legislation were already covered off. We'd had some indication that the existing bylaw, the proposed one from two years ago, took into account everything up to 2020. But we still don't have it. Here we go again.
I think in fairness, Bob, I agree that in May of 2018, we had a bylaw that I thought was very close to being workable. It probably still is. And we sent it back with some minor changes, plus the engineer, or the handbook. And I've been sitting here for 2 years waiting, and nothing's come back. Then, 2 years later, we don't have it. So I think in fairness, Bob, I agree that in May of 2018, we had a bylaw that I thought was very close to being workable. It probably still is. And we sent it back with some minor changes, plus the engineer, or the handbook. And I've been sitting here for 2 years waiting, and what I thought Jim Wallace's draft did, I don't think it's so much, yes, we are looking at two versions, but I think his builds on what was done before, plus the new legislation, and presents us with a better bylaw.
Here we go.
I'd like to refer to this comment that's constantly being made about new regulations. I have an email from Ian McLaurin, who is the president of the Ontario Soil Regulation Task Force, who actually sat on the provincial task force to develop the new regulations. And I asked him, have there been any changes that are in the final regulations that weren't there in 2018? And his answer is no. And I know it myself as well. I attended a recent seminar in January down in Toronto, which said the same thing. I want to add to what Bob has said. This council has been elected to administer. In 2018, the previous council made a recommendation to staff to finish that previous one. Somewhere along the line, that recommendation was not followed, or that motion was not followed. A company was engaged to write a whole new fill bylaw. And when I can even give you from further information, when I checked if the existing one was being looked at, I was told it wasn't even being changed. So the question I have is, where was the decision made, and why was the decision made to write a new fill bylaw? Who authorized that? Was there a proposal requested to do it? What was the budget for it? Because these are all governance issues. And none of these questions have been answered or asked. And to me, this council has the responsibility to govern. And here we have a situation that, from us as residents, seems out of control. There's talk about getting together with the people that wrote the previous version. That opportunity was there. That could have been done. Why is it happening now, after the money's been spent to write a new fill bylaw? I mean, there's all kinds of questions, and I'll leave it at that right now.
Michael Lang here, Ontario Street. Can I ask, please, how would the town control and enforce the bylaw? Does anybody have an answer?
Yeah.
Current bylaw? Michael?
Any bylaw, like this bylaw, this land, the past or the future?
Depends on how the bylaw's written.
It depends on how it's written? Okay.
Part of it
That's fine then, but still, we must
And
govern.
what's required by law.
Oh, okay, just a minute now. So we must govern. If we've got a bylaw, we've got technology, all kinds of it available. Either we purchase the technology or we insist through the bylaw that any truck entering this town have a GPS tracking device on it. And that a daily report come into this office and that it be made available to the public on the internet. So every bylaw requiring 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 trucks, there must be a daily report, GPS downloaded daily report. And if they come in without, they are not allowed into the community without a serviceable GPS. They're very available. There are corporations out there that supply this hardware and the software. But it shouldn't be at our cost. It should be at the trucker's cost or the trucking company. I just suggest that any new bylaw or future bylaw or 2018 bylaw, that it incorporate this. It's the only way I can see that we can control this issue. Otherwise, I mean, I can tell you, it's hard enough to count 10 truckloads coming in your yard, let alone 1,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Michael Penny. I live on the 4th line. If you don't mind, I'll sit down. One statement, 2 questions. I'm listening to all of this, and I've done an awful lot of reading on it, and I've read the 2018 proposal. The statement I'm going to make is quite simple. Had the council acted on the 2018 situation or the bylaw,
the situation on the fourth line wouldn't be in front of us right now. The questions I have are, is the bylaw going to be retroactive? Number one. Okay, and number two, can council put on hold any applications that may be put before them until this bylaw is finally ratified? Because this looks like it's going to go on for a while. I mean, you know, this is micromanaging extraordinaire. I'm sorry. It really is. You have a recommendation in front of you, and I don't know why you're not acting on it. That's all. Thank you.
Elaine Kehoe, Mona Center Road. One of the other things that hasn't been addressed, which was asked and not answered, is the cost to us as citizens. This has been going on, as we know, from the Cox period, when everybody was given assurances that we would have a bylaw in place, and we are still standing here today not. How much is this costing us?
Mr. Early or Mr. Trotwood?
The cost, I don't know, Elaine. I've heard the comment, and I'll certainly be going through our files on it. Mr. Walls was not retained until probably late last year to push this through, to have it come forward and brought forward. So, you know, from our perspective, it just became workload, staff volume, and it was felt that the best person to bring in would be a geoscientist from our town engineers, who are going to be sitting in front of the trucks and in front of the applications as the qualified personnel to go through this. But I'll certainly endeavor to bring the costs and the invoices forward from Burnside's.
Did we not have, when we decided to go forward and retain, did we not have a cost base at that point?
We had a budget to prepare the guidelines. So that was a budgeted item both in 2019 and in the 2020 budget by council. So we had that, and it was felt at that time to bring forward the rationale document as well to explain the nuances of the bylaw that Burnside had prepared.
So this is being done on an hourly basis? There's no, like normally when you ask somebody to do a job, you ask for a quote. You say, how much is this going to cost us?
Fair enough.
Has that question been asked?
I have not put that limit in place with Burnside's as of yet. The push was to get a bylaw out, developed to the highest standards, and to get it in front of council as soon as possible.
With respect, this has been like 4 years, 5 years? Like what's
8 years.
8, okay.
Started in 2012 with our prohibitive bylaw,
Okay.
amended in 2014, and then we had the draft in 2018, and then this one.
So the necessity to go forward so quickly without even a budget in place was, the rationale was so we could have this, when we had a 218 draft that was considered very good by council, with tweaks required, absolutely.
And the preparation of the manual.
So,
Right.
okay, so we talking additional cost of the manual.
No, I'm talking the additional cost of the rationale. The manual had been budgeted in 2019 and 2020 by council.
Okay, we'll wait to see your numbers. Thank you.
John?
Elaine, I have 6 notices of motion, 3 which deal with the question of procurement, 1 which asks for a detailed and itemized invoices for all the work done on this issue. So I'll be introducing those at the end of the meeting.
Lou Baker. I want to read you something from a letter I received from a ratepayer. It was received on March the 7th. Before I do that, I want to comment about the history. During the Cox matter, I went to the planning director at the time and asked him during the process, but before the hearing, to start to do a draft of improving our bylaw. He got back to me by saying, the lawyer said I can't do that, there's litigation. I went back to him after the decision, after the hearing, and while we were waiting several months for the decision, I again said, let's do the draft. Let's make the changes to tighten the bylaw, so nobody will ever want to dump fill in Mono. Got the same answer back again. So that is that part of the progress that wasn't progress. In addition to that, I suggested to him that all notices in relation to fill should have an extension to the neighbors of over 2,000 meters. And I've now considered it should be 2,500 meters. Because if in Cox, he had one and had contaminated fill, the Sheldon Creek and the Haddock River would have been contaminated and would have destroyed the water sources in Cedar Lane. That's 2 kilometers away. So everything really has stood still since 2016. You had something before you. It didn't go ahead recently. The planning committee gave you their opinion as to what they would like to see done. Staff has overruled that. So now I'll read this letter that I have no permission to reveal who it is because I haven't even discussed it with them. I do not feel that the top bureaucrats of Mono, I do not feel that the top bureaucrats of Mono are doing their job as the ratepayers would expect. They are just pushing their own ideas, it would appear, and using consultants for between the lines. I think also that they are not really being accountable to council for whom they should answer directly. Having said that, I don't think the council are holding them to accountability. As a business owner and having been a manager for years, I know this would not last in a private situation. And this man is a very active participant in Mono and at council meetings. And he had just summarized the last hour of our discussion and the last 5 years of Mono Fill. It's about time council realized the lack of accountability by staff. Thank you.
Okay, so this project has been a lot of work for a lot of people, and there has been a suggestion made, one to approve the motion received by the planning committee, and the other was to ask Mr. Walls to go and meet again with the crafters of the 2018 proposed draft bylaw and to work with them to see if there's any middle ground that can be done. So I leave it for suggestions on how we want to proceed.
I'm just a little worried, given some of the feelings that have been expressed before this council meeting, whether there's any point in Mr. Walls sitting down with some of the citizens who helped with the 2018 version.
John?
I still think that, notwithstanding the hard feelings about this, that it is worthwhile to try and reconcile the two different approaches, and one last effort should be made before we think about sending anything off to a lawyer or coming up with a final version. We may or may not decide at the end of the day to have a public meeting, but I think at the very minimum, we need to try and reconcile the two versions.
Ralph?
I suggest we break for coffee. I appreciate the comments of everybody from the floor. And as Bob knows, who was on council, the trip from Highway 9 to 89 is never a straight line when you're dealing with these things. There are lots of rocks in the way. But I think we're getting somewhere. I think we're very close to it. And John, if we look at the two documents, the 2018, the 2020, right up to number 5, they're quite parallel, and the document that Jim has brought to us makes use of, often word for word, from that 2018 document, as that one made use from word for word from previous ones. So we're continuing to build on them, and it's getting better. And there are lots of questions about process, which we can't answer here. They concern me, but now is March 2020, and I'd like to move on with it. And if it is beneficial to meet, for Jim to meet with other people who were involved with this, particularly Ed Croker and Don Sinclair and Louis Baker and others, and get their input, I'm in favor of that. I'm also in favor of him incorporating the suggestions that council have outlined here today.
So with that in mind, is anyone prepared to put a motion on the floor to give direction?
Before trying to write it out, I haven't got my mic on, could we put a motion before that in effect receives this 2020 document and asks that further input be sought, something to that effect? We're not approving it, we're just receiving it and asking for more input. I don't know exactly.
Okay, do you want to draft something up? Do you have?
Well, actually, we're receiving two documents. One is the recommendation of the Planning Committee, and the other is the Phil bylaw as presented by Burnside. So effectively, we're receiving both and giving direction to have further discussions.
I suppose that the two documents we're receiving are sort of irreconcilable because one says don't accept this, but I guess we can receive both of them.
So, is anybody?
While you consider a motion, perhaps a little input from the Planning Committee will help you with this. In fact, what you're suggesting of Jim Walls and meeting with Ed Craker, who was the author of the 2018 version, which council did approve back in May 29th of 2018. Planning Committee did think that this was a good idea, but I think all of you know circumstances about with Ed's involvement here, and one of the things that, first off, I agree that is absolutely the best course of action. But secondly, and you can quote me on this, I said at the February 25th Planning Committee meeting, given circumstances, I can't ask Ed Craker to spend another minute on this. So some things do need to be resolved, and absolutely to bring this to a conclusion, Ed Craker and Jim Walls and others, and I'm happy as the chair of the Planning Committee to be involved with this as a chair or a referee. I say that jokingly, please smile, but I'm happy to help broker the marriage of these two documents and putting in some of the suggestions that council made. So I make that offer to you because frankly, and the planning committees have been at this actively since 2016. Frankly, don't misunderstand what I'm about to say. We don't want to see this back at the Planning Committee. We want to resolve it and as fast as possible. But if you send it back to us, we'll do our job because we like doing a good job. But that is my suggestion. Now, how you resolve this so that I can ask Ed Craker here to spend more than another minute on it, you figure that out. But that's my input here as the chair of the Planning Committee.
I would just like to add a comment. I understand what Mr. Nick said. I have never said that I am not interested in nor do I even feel that I'm not interested in getting involved in this process. In fact, at the end of the planning committee meeting, and I know Jim very well. In fact, let me just back up a little. While we were crafting the 2018 document, Mr. Lewis and I suggested that we meet with Burnside. I mean, at the time, I didn't know Jim. That we meet with Burnside to make sure that what was being put forward would be acceptable to an engineering company that probably would be engaged. We were told at the time it wasn't time to meet with them. And I didn't want to take the initiative and end up spending town's money without any authority to meet with Burnside. But so fast forward to the committee meeting, I went to Jim right after the meeting and I said, Jim, I'm quite open to sitting down with you and working through the document. And it was in the context of the recommendation that came out of the planning committee that the 2018 document be modified. If there are some new things in the regulations, I have no problem with it. But it was that was when the 2018 document was on the table. It doesn't mean that that's the only condition on which I will meet with Jim, of course. But I just want to put a context in all this. I'm not against sitting down and coming to an agreement on things at all. I think one of the things that wasn't talked about this morning was the securities section of the document. I think there is a lot of beefing up to do in the document that you've received now with regard to securities. But I don't want to get into all these details. These are things that we work out in the end. But I just want to say that yes, I do have frustrations. I think the committee has frustrations because basically what's come across this morning is they've been ignored. The previous council was ignored because their recommendations and their motion hasn't been followed in this process, and you've heard that expressed by citizens here this morning. It's a governance issue that everybody is frustrated with, along with the fact that we haven't had an enforcement of the existing bylaw, and it's, you know, there's been criticism of our existing 2014 bylaw. It's not a terrible document, and yet we haven't even been enforcing that one. So that's all I want to.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got a motion that we receive the R.J. Burnside's draft fill bylaw and ask that R.J. Burnside's further refine the draft by incorporating any further public and council comments. Moved by Magdalo. Yeah?
It doesn't appear that we're actually directing further discussion between the architects of the 2018 document as facilitated by Bob McCrae.
Well, that was not part of the motion as it stands. It was to refine the draft by incorporating any further public and council comments. So whenever Mr. Walls is able to convene a meeting, I would assume it would be here, and it would be a working process.
I think it needs to be plainer. I think it has to be stated explicitly that the parties are to meet, because otherwise the interpretation could be that Mr. Walls has simply got direction from us today as well as comments from the audience, and he can go away and make those changes. I think there needs to be further discussion.
Should we add by convening a meeting of all interested parties?
We could even name one of the interested parties. When I wrote the draft, John, I just wasn't sure that we can actually mandate these two people to sit down to get together.
We can't force them to, but I think we should indicate that's our desire, and that it's a good thing to do.
So, okay, so by convening a meeting, earliest date possible.
With the PH and whatever that came out, the planning, natural heritage, and
Well, or
committee.
it wouldn't necessarily be the committee.
That's true.
Meeting earliest date with interested parties. How about that?
When do we get a coffee?
But just hang on. Okay. So that we receive the R.J. Burnside draft bill bylaw and ask that R.J. Burnside's further refine the draft by incorporating any further public and council comments by convening a meeting earliest date with interested parties. Is that okay?
And convening. So they're incorporating and convening. To incorporate.
Well, I was starting with the 2018 and then incorporating the present with that. That would be that specific.
We'll leave it up to the parties as they sit down
No, that's not how
and
that's not how your
convening. Pardon?
Madam Mayor,
Pardon?
that's not how that works. Or
Well,
it'll become that's how it's-
I think we heard from Mr. Walls that he is more than happy to sit down and discuss everything with the people that have put a lot of time and vested interest in. And so he's prepared to hold that meeting. And if at that time somebody gets appointed as a referee, I think that that's the easiest way to go. And then they,
But Madam Mayor, that goes against the motion from that committee about a week ago.
It's an advisory committee.
Totally
it's an advisory committee.
contravenes the
So,
motion.
no,
We don't, we advised something. This is all changing that somewhat. But I don't have a problem with that.
That motion should be respected. Your motion should be.
They did.
No, we,
They did.
if I may, Mr. Lang, what we're doing is we're effectively receiving the recommendation of the planning committee. We're receiving the recommendation of Burnside's, and we're deciding to do something slightly different to try and reconcile the two different versions. So I don't, just because we get a recommendation doesn't mean that we have to have a yes or no up and down vote on it.
That motion does not make that clear.
Okay, so what we're going to do then, let's see if this works. We start with that council receive the resolution of advice from Planning, Environment, and Natural Heritage Committee dated February 25th, 2020. And council receive the RJB, what is it? March 4th? Report from, March 4th? March 4th, 20. And then,
Bring the bylaw is February 14th, 2020. That's the Burnside bylaw.
I think if you received the March 4th report from our director of planning, you can in fact incorporate that.
That's very more specific. Yeah.
okay, so it's the March 4th report from the Director of Planning?
Director of Planning.
Okay, so,
Maybe we should have a coffee break and try to write this out properly.
well, I just don't want to get the impetus lost.
I'm worried if we don't get the wording right, we'll create more of a mess.
Okay, so let's try this.
Why don't we get staff to help us write it?
Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I think it would be safer.
Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute recess? 10. We're going to take 10 minutes and get staff to assist us in this. Mr. Simpson, are you able to put that draft? Oh,
Yes, I just need a few seconds to catch up.
okay.
That's the whole motion?
No, this is,
We had another meeting at our house last night. We had another meeting at our house last night, so that's pieces of carrot cake. State
okay, so the Draft motion is up on the screen, and we don't have a mover or seconder yet.
Receive resolution advice from the Planning, Environment, and Natural Heritage Committee.
I like it.
I like it.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
Could I have a mover? Moved by Manctalo and seconded by Nix. And all in favor? That carries. Okey dokey. So, just in terms of time, we do have to do, for sure, the Public Works tenders. But in the interim, if there's anything that staff feels that can be held to the next meeting, I hate to do it, but just in terms of other people's scheduling. I know John's got to get home to his dogs.
Oh, no, I'm good. They're good.
Okay.
I would like to see us deal with the addition with regard to temporary speed bumps, because I know we
Yeah,
have somebody who is deeply concerned about
Yeah.
speed bumps on Vanbury.
Yes,
so-
and Mr. Edmonds is here regarding Mono-Angela Town Line, so we'll get her all done. Okay, so OPP Municipal Bylaw Enforcement, Letter of Understanding. Is there any questions or comments on that letter?
Just everything with them takes time.
Okay, so we have a motion that the letter of understanding dated February 12th, 2020, between the Town of Mono and the Dufferin OPP regarding the enforcement of town bylaws be sent to the Dufferin OPP Detachment Commander with a copy to the Police Service Board. Can I have a mover? Moved by Creelman and seconded by Nix. All in favor? That carries. And we have, the next item is the installation of speed bumps, and thank you to Mr. Monroe for providing that information forward. And then we have the report from Mr. Dunmore regarding the speed hump installations that he is proposing. So if there's no questions, we have a motion that the Director of Public Works undertakes the installation of 3 seasonal traffic calming speed humps with associated signage at location he deems appropriate on French Drive, Kingfisher Drive, and Bayberry Road. Could I have a mover? Moved by Nix, seconded by Creelman. Any further discussion?
Mr. Dunmore, could you elaborate on why we're doing Kingfisher Drive? No one lives there, and it's not I didn't think it was a problem area, but.
We've had some residential complaints, and we've also noticed that it's starting to become a shortcut for people to avoid the intersection of Hockley Road and Highway 10. That was the original location that I had planned to put one, and so the amount that council approved in this year's budget would appropriately handle 3 installations. That was where I was heading with the Kingfisher.
This will be the removable speed bumps?
Yes, and then and Mr. Monroe alluded to it in the residents' petition about a test area. There's probably 50 drill holes that have to occur to put in a temporary. So you can imagine 20 years from now, you have to move them a little. So I want to continue this as a test area. Cardinal Woods underwent video and CCTV video on the sewers. It's coming up in our asphalt replacement plan as well. Should the results be the desired effect, we would start to look at a more permanent installation, an elongated speed hump that would cause the slowdown and give the ability for plows to traverse over them, should the residents deem them to be appropriate. And I think what we'll do is when we install these things, we'll start to put our solar speed sign, which tracks vehicle speeds, make sure they're working as well.
So if there's nothing further, all in favor? carries. Okay, Public Works tenders, the herbicides for invasive Phragmites.
So as council can see, we budgeted 15,000 for this. We received a very competitive price. We believe we're going to have multiple treatments as well. The 1,500 square meters of area that we have Phragmites in will not all be treated with this product because there are some in wet areas right now, and we're still working through the type of herbicides that could be or can be applied in the future. So we're pretty happy with this, and we believe that we can get a good jump on the dry areas.
Okay, so could I? Yes.
I still have one concern, which I think I've told Mike. I've also talked it over with the county, because they are going to have a Phragmites control program this year also. My opinion, it's just an opinion, Mike, is that if a road agency such as yourself or the county, you've got some Phragmites in a ditch, and behind that you've got a whole field of Phragmites, quite frankly, I think you're wasting the money to spray the ditch, because those rhizomes are 20, 30 feet under the ground. Yeah, you'll kill off the vegetation this year, and next year you'll be right back to where you started. I've told that to Scott Martin, and he says, well, their main concern is they got to get the ditches cleaned out. All right, so I'm glad you're doing this. I would really like a report a year from now as to, did it actually get rid of the did it improve anything? Because I think you're going to be into a perpetual spraying program in what you're doing. I personally think it would be far better to pick an area where, you as a town have some Phragmites, the neighboring landowner has some Phragmites, and together we work out a strategy to get rid of the whole damn patch.
Well, the whole goal is to work with the private landowners where it stretches onto their property. We won't be doing individual private ponds, though, I can guarantee that. But we will be picking areas that we believe that we can attack it as a whole, and we will need residential permission.
Scott Martin is not doing it that way.
We've been in discussions to cooperate with the county on their program, but I'm not sure where they're going with that. But we have isolated areas inside of Mono that do not include county roads, and those are the treatment areas that we're trying to attack. Do I think we're going to knock it out 100%? No. Do I think we're going to stop the spread of millions of seeds every year that come out of these? And I think we'll limit it, and we'll be ahead of the game, I believe.
So give us a report of monitoring, in effect, how effective this was at some point.
Well, we believe it's a 3-year program.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't. This is not something that we're going to eradicate all in 1 year, and will be a 3-year cycle, we believe, before we do see the full results. So, I will be back at council for a reoccurring budget on a yearly basis, right? I know it's you saw the picture of me in Leamington, and quite personally, if we don't start to get ahead of this right now, our patches will just double in size over the years.
Well,
I'm delighted to see this. I think it's going to be a learning process, and I think that you have indicated that you understand that as well. I have 3 questions. One is about the agent. Which of the, I think there are 2 or 3 agents that are available, are you using? What's the technique you're using? And what is your plans with respect to Phragmites that is growing in water?
So it's Roundup Herbicide Max. That's with a glyphosate. Sorry, your second question was? This will be a spray treatment for the larger areas on. Sorry, I got so many tenders today. July, we're looking at early summer spraying. Single application with maybe a rehit in the fall. With this price, we can look at a rehit in the fall when all the nutrients are in the top of any rhizomes that are growing. And then the third question, sorry.
What about areas which are sitting in water?
We've been in discussion with our brushing contractor, with the boom cutter. We've also contemplated clogging some culverts to keep the water up a little higher, but right now we're looking at probably cutting, and hopefully drowning out in the spring. But really, we're hoping that there's a herbicide that comes approval for spraying in water.
Okay, so could I have a mover for the motion that we accept the unit bid price, including tax for supply, delivery, and application of herbicides for invasive Phragmites from Lishner's Lawn and Vegetation Management of Gormley, Ontario, in the amount of $1.89 per unit meters squared. So moved by Nix and seconded by Mangtalo. Any further comment? All in favor? Carries. Okay, so street sweeping. Any questions regarding this?
Pretty
Tim?
standard. The price has gone up a little, but we have used Glen sweeping, not last year, but the year before, so.
Okay, so we have a motion that council for the town of Mono accept the unit bid price, including tax for street sweeping with operators on various roads in the town from Glenn's Street Sweeping of Utopia, Ontario, in the amount of $281.94 per hour, including HST, and 2 units with operators. Moved by Magtalo and seconded by Nix. Any questions? All in favor? Carried. Winter sand.
Pretty straightforward. Price
Okay.
went down 5 cents per ton, so.
That council for the town of Mono accept the unit bid price of $17.69, including tax from Dwywarden Hullage Limited of Innisfil, Ontario, to supply, load, haul, mix, and stockpile approximately 6,400 tons of winter road sand. Moved by Nix and seconded by Magtalo. All in favor? Carries. Lawn maintenance.
So as council will note, the cost per cut has significantly gone up. Les and I will work through any budgetary issues with the individual properties, but we're going to be close to expending those budgets over the year, but we firmly believe with the company that is recommended here, we hope to eliminate any of the concerns that residents and council has heard over the last couple of years, so.
Okay, so we have a motion that council for the town of Mono accept the price of $3,157.79 per cut, including all taxes from Sunshine Landscaping, 212-5969 Ontario, Inc. of Mono, Ontario, to provide lawn maintenance on various properties in the town of Mono. Moved by Creelman, seconded by Nix. Any discussion? All in favor? Carries. And dust suppressant.
We opened it up to magnesium chloride this year, which we were tasked by a couple of the dust suppressant contractors for not allowing this product, but it's funny how things happen. It's going to be discontinued over the coming years. I don't know whether that's a supply of magnesium, but all 3 bidders, which normally have different products, have all bid on calcium chloride this year. It's the first time we've ever had 3 companies bid on calcium. And Daly has been the company of record since I've been employed by the town, so we're recommending them again.
Okay. So that council for the town of Mono accept the unit bid price, including tax, for supply, delivery, and application of calcium chloride from Daily Dust Control of Stony Creek, Ontario, in the amount of 28 cents per liter for calcium chloride. Moved by Creelman and seconded by Nix. Any discussion? All in favor? Maintenance gravel.
So we separated this year into the product that we installed or applied on here, Ontario, from County Road, County Road 8 to 20 Side Road. We're pretty happy with that product, but we budgeted 10,000 of the crusher run limestone and 20,000 tons of the granular A. We're still sort of monitoring the results of the limestone crusher run, but we will be applying it to selective places that we believe it's best suited for, which is our wetland areas, Bad Base, the here Ontario section. Always had breakup and potholes at this time of year with this type of weather, and we've had some positive results. As you can see, the price is significantly different. It's mainly due to the haul rates. Last year, we were only $1 separation between the granular A, but it just so happened that one of the local pits had a large pile of this product trucked down. So it's something that we're going to look at in the future if we're still continuing to be happy with this product, and we'll continue to utilize it, but we may be looking at buying bulk piles as opposed to and try and get them down into a closer range. But we're semi-happy with the granular A still. The shoulders are very soft in these last couple of days, but we're going to still remain to mix back and forth between the two products on certain types of existing road bases.
Okay. So we have a motion, the council for the town of Mono accept the unit bid price, including tax, from Strata Aggregates of Concord, Ontario, to supply, load, haul, and spread approximately 20,000 tons of granular A material on various roads in the amount of $13.28 per ton, and 10,000 tons of three-quarter limestone crusher run in the amount of $16.27 per ton. Moved by Manktalow and seconded by Creelman. All in favor? Oh, sorry.
Question, Mr. Dunmore. 1/3 of this will be the crusher run, which you're hoping to be better limestone. Just very briefly, how are you going to decide where to put that? I'm sure that residents will ask me why we don't have this on their road.
It'll happen. Very similar to the speed bumps. The people are going to be wanting them, right? But right now we're picking some of our worst beat-up, potholed, muddy sections right now, and trying to stabilize those, see if it'll work as a better stabilizer for those roads. The amount of grading that was required last summer was probably cut in half.
For the here Ontario?
For here Ontario. So, but the guys are generally happy with it, how it performed over the winter with freeze and thaw cycles. But as you can see by the price, we're just not jumping full in, but we are definitely starting to. The thoughts is that in the scheme of 10 years, we'll probably have white roads as opposed to brown roads. So that's the thought. As long as the price stays generally competitive and the haul rates don't increase, that's. But there'll be a map. There'll be a map that will be put on the website as the locations that. And unless council gives me direction to start jumping around, I think we just stay on the course of our Public Works recommended locations.
I'm pleased to see this initiative.
Okay, so call for the vote. All in favor? Carries. And now Bridge 39 replacement.
So Bridge 39 is located at Lot 27, if council remember over the last couple of years. At Lot 28, we had a failed culvert on Monowedge town line, and that was completed last year. And in the discovery of that, we also had failed culverts at Lot 27 on Monowedge town line.
The budgeted amount was $1 million for this, and we're happy that the prices came in as they did from a respectable contractor. R&M completed the slope stabilization work on on 5th line south of 25 Side Road last year, where we lost the road. And they also did work for us on Bridge 26 on Mono-Agila Town Line in 2010. So we're pretty happy with them.
Okay, so we have a motion that council for the town of Mono accept the bid price of $818,186.51, including HST, from R&M Construction of Acton, Ontario, for the replacement of Bridge 39 at Lot 27 on Mono-Agila Town Line. Have a mover? Moved by Creelman and seconded by Mantalo. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carries. Okay, so item 3, rental subsidy request. And we've got the information from Ms. Heaton regarding the Headwaters Food and Farming Alliance. And what is the wish of council? We have money in our donations budget?
I think that we should give them some support. I did the math, and it looks to me like they're close to breaking even. I attended this event, and I was just guessing that there were 120 people there. Maybe I suggest that we give them $200.
200?
Yes. 407 was, I think, the cost for the rental. Is that right?
Totally $417.
417.
Yeah.
So I'm suggesting that we we could make it 50%.
Okay. So
That way I'm pretty sure they'd be breaking even then.
So that would be $217? That is the rental fee?
Half of 417.
It's supposed to be half that,
Half of 417. He was saying 50%.
So 50, so
50 cents.
Your worship, if you just add the word waives 50% of, just add that into the resolution. Waives 50%
all
of
right.
the $360 fee and 50% of.
Okay, so the council waives 50% of the $360 rental fee and 50% of the $57 setup fee for the Menorah Park Banquet Room for Headwaters Food and Farming Alliance on Friday, March 6, 2020, for the purpose of holding the Building Resilience into your farm event. So I can have a mover? Moved by Nix and seconded by Mantalo. All in favor? Carried. Okay, next is the flag raising. So it's, April is declared as Sikh Heritage Month in Ontario. I did attend Orangeville's flag raising last year, I believe. So they're asking for Moto to consider doing one. Now, in discussion with Mr. Simpson, we would have to remove the Ontario flag because we've only got the 2 poles.
The town of Mono, current
Sorry.
etiquette doesn't like seeing 2 flags flown on a single pole anymore.
Yeah.
So we would remove the town of Mono flag and leave the national flag, of course, flying.
So I brought this to council for acceptance or?
I believe we actually have a policy on flying flags and half-staff and all that fun stuff.
We do, but it's only for in recognition of in memoriam or death or whatever. It doesn't talk about these special months. Now, mind you, the last time we had to do this was for Pan Am, and that was a few years ago. Now, this could be an annual request from the Sikh community.
Well, I like the idea, but I like the idea of maybe amending our current policy to allow for these special occasions.
And then it doesn't have to.
So we don't have to really worry about it anymore.
Okay. Okay, so if we are in agreement, there's a motion that in recognition of Sikh Heritage Month, Council authorizes the raising and ceremonial flying of the Sikh flag at Town Hall during the month of April 2020. Can I have a mover? Moved by Nix and seconded by Creelman. All in favor? Carried. And if staff can make note that we do an adjustment to our flag raising policy. Okay, so we have quite a few items on Schedule A. So I just, because Mr. Edmonds is in the gallery and has been patiently waiting, Mr. Dunmore, you did have information brought forward from staff regarding traffic counts yesterday from...
Oh, sorry. So we're talking about, item number...
Five.
Five, okay.
Sorry.
I know councilors had responded to Mr. Edmonds. They were pretty detailed. Thought they were pretty good, but the complaint is not singular to the road network in the town of Mono. It's similar to the experiences that we're having today. I believe this was generated from an incident that occurred on roughly February 5th, where a van went into the ditch, was pulled off the road. The temperatures went from -5 to +3 in a matter of 3 days, so it did generate a large amount of slurry. Council has received some very detailed emails from me over the past as to what we believe is causing this, the freeze and thaw. And also, further to the conversation on the maintenance gravel, we're looking at information or we're looking at different types of gravel to try and get rid of this situation. There was also complaints in the email about dust and stuff, and we recognize that as a gravel road network issue. Normally, and Councillor Nix hinted on this in his response to the resident, normally we try and weigh our maintenance and maintenance costs against traffic flows, and we've set a level from roughly 400 to 500 vehicles as an average traffic count. That was why I had provided council with the traffic counts for that section late last night. We still have higher volume gravel roads in our town. In 1989, 1993, 2015, and 2022, there was roads needs studied prepared for the town. 4 of those were prepared by the RJB Engineering, RJB Burnside, and the last one prepared by myself. This section of road was never identified as a recipient of asphalt at that time. There was 3 or 4 structures inside of the 2022 draft roads needs plan that needed to be attended to prior to any thought of rehabilitation of this road network. We've also had Lot 27, Lot 28 culvert structures sneak up on us. And then we got some work that we're doing on Rosemount urbanization this year. That past works at the end of 2021 will be $2.2 million to that section of roadway. Gets us in really good position with our structures to start to think about road rehabilitation. The
The estimated cost for 3 kilometers of road rebuild is $1.8 to $2 million. From lot 15 to 30 Side Road, being 9 kilometers, would give council a rough estimate of $18 million to rehabilitate that section of road. The topography, as council is aware, has some very skinny sections of road, some very, just the lot 27 that staff will be working on this year. We had to come to a land transfer agreement with an Agila resident because we don't have enough room to rehabilitate the road to the size that we want. So we're definitely not applying financial money to the Mono-Agila town line. We're definitely trying to get it into a position where we can look at roads that need to be rehabilitated. And as I noted earlier, we are applying a different type of limestone crusher run as a test product for areas that are starting to fall apart quicker due to the changing in the temperatures. So as like all of our roads that roughly are around 350 to 450 average vehicles a day, we are keeping an eye on them. But I'd also like to point out that the bridges and the culverts and the roads identified in the 2022 draft roads need study is when it comes to an end at 2022. That plan was created at a point in time when we were receiving a lot of infrastructure grants from the province, and we were running roughly $3 to $5 million worth of capital in 2008, 2009, and 2010. That's dropped to right around 1.5 in the last couple of years because there is no grants available to the town of Mono. And so the 2012 to 2022 draft roads need study that I submitted to council, for lack of better words, is way behind. And structures have become the main priority, and council's been supportive of those. So we are looking at all our roads. We try to fix them as the levy allows us to on a yearly basis, and it's not something that's lost on us. The content of the email is definitely something that we'll look at. We'll continue to watch, and we'll continue to bring roads that are appropriate for rebuild to council in the future.
Mr. Edmonds, does that help with?
It does, and having been here for the last several hours, there's a number of issues that have happened. So, Madam Mayor and Mr. Deputy Mayor and Councilors, I appreciate your response to the letter. That was born obviously not just from myself and frustration, but from discussions with neighbors as well, and frustration that we have with that road and the concerns for the safety of residents and students as well. And we, as I outlined in the email there, we routinely see school bus lines fishtailing up and down those hills. And it's a matter of time before something happens that I believe is stoppable prior to that point. So I appreciate the time taken so far. I think you'll excuse the fun. I understand it's a long road to get anything done. And this is a learning process for me as well. The fact that we're doing something addressing here Ontario and tests. I'm certainly interested to see the results of this. And I'd like to look forward that maybe we continue with the plan to work towards the roads that we're looking at. I don't know what that plan is. I don't know what the process is. But maybe we do expect to look at roads that maybe are in need, and I would prefer that the town line is one.
Yeah.
If this program, this new product, the limestone crush works well, that might be a good solution for the problems we're having on the town.
Much appreciated. The draft 2012 to 2022 roads need study is online under the Public Works section. So if it'll give you I can talk to you after you've read it to tell you where council has prioritized money and why we're not on track with that plan. And you'll see the basis of how I looked at the roads that year. There's also a roads need study being done this year under development charges. We hope to have that in council's hand before budget.
which will start to reprioritize roads for council's review that may be ready for pavement at their existing dimensions, and maybe ready for pavement a little earlier than what we initially had expected due to the way they're built right now. Obviously, we wouldn't pave a road that's too skinny today without major rehab. So it's definitely something that we had long discussions yesterday whether we would have enough product to apply the limestone crusher run from 25 to 30 side road as a starting point. What we haven't utilized this project on is hills and valleys yet, and we're sort of just piecing with that right now. And but the results on the flat surfaces are definitely positive, and we'll continue to monitor. But I do want to reiterate that you're not alone. My email inbox is full this morning. You're not alone on the weather conditions that are happening, and if you can appreciate, and I think you can, we're trying to pick off the major structure issues first, trying to get them widened out so that when council does, or some grant of money does come available, we can start to look at paving certain roads with higher traffic volumes. So, yeah. So.
Paving would be the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Great. I understand, obviously, that's not a short-term solution. So if this gravel helps in the short term,
Not promising, but we'll definitely look at, like, we identified it yesterday as a potential area, if we have some overruns from some of the spots that we identified, like Councillor Mangtalo and I had discussed earlier today. Okay? Good.
Okay. Wanted to make note of item number 3, the delegation to MTO and the minister was well thought out and planned by Mr. Dunmore. Very well received. He did his show in what he originally thought was going to be 20 minutes, and turned out he was told it was 10. So he talked fast. And there was certain recognition. It wasn't as many blank stares as there has been in the past, so we'll see whether or not there's any communication comes back. So thank you very much, Mr. Dunmore, for doing that.
So the regional directors of Central and Southwestern Region have both reached out to me as of last week, and they're preparing a visit in the coming weeks. We're trying to organize schedules right now. So we're hoping, and a great. We got some great video today of Campbell Road cross culvert overflowing, which was a culvert we had identified that needed to be increased, and 20 side road up at Highway 10 is overflowing right now, and it's coming onto the Ministry Highway, so it causes our residents concern. It doesn't cause Public Works concern, but it definitely causes traffic traveling. So hopefully those videos are well received. Shame to fix something after it's been repaved, but.
Okay, and then item 14, the request for Mono to create a team to go into the rowing challenge. And so I think it's been customary that we let Councillor Mangtalo organize that.
Well, I guess the question is, are there enough people that like to do this? I can tell you it's for staff and upstairs staff as well. And it's you don't need to be able to do anything except step into a boat. And we've simplified it that you only have to use one oar. In other words, it's sweep rowing. And what will happen is you'll arrive and you'll have somebody from the club will put you on some rowing machines, and we'll just show you what you have to do to row. You know, rowing's an interesting sport because you can do it up until any age. It's a low impact, and it's good exercise for your back, your abs, your arms, your legs. And so when you get on the rowing machine, we'll show you how to use your arms and your back and your legs in concert. And then all you have to do when you get in the boat is put the oar in your hands and go and row. So the idea was just to create a little bit of fun, to give you an introduction, and people, it's a chance for you in 2 or 3 hours to have a cram course of rowing. And the thought was we'd make it into a bit of a competition with other municipalities. So I know some of the councillors on the Orangeville Council who, last time they said they couldn't come because they didn't know about it or something. So I'm going to get in touch with them in the next few days, and hopefully they'll come, and maybe we'll have Calden and some others. I would suggest that at the next council meeting, we decide whether or not we have a crew or not, and that Mark or Fred, could you pass this around to the staff upstairs? So, okay.
I thought you were going to ask us to delegate who will go.
Delegate what?
Who will go?
But there may be a competition for it. We can have 2 boats. We're going to have boat A and a boat B, but we only need 4 to 6 people, and the club will put 2 other people and a coxswain, so that, you know, it's, even if nobody else rows, there's 2 people rowing and a coxswain, so you'll get back home.
Yeah, Ralph had just asked me if I participated last year. I said no, but I did. It was the word challenge that threw me. I didn't realize it was a challenge last year. But it was a lot of fun. I think there's a few other members of council who maybe we should try to encourage to join us, but
No.
That's why you're talking with other people. I would give you your own costume.
Okay, so those are the only ones that I wanted to mention. So Ralph, did you have any other items on Schedule A?
You've usurped me. Those were the 2 I wanted to.
Okay. Okay, Fred?
I would have a whole bunch, but time just doesn't allow for it. I really would like to know from David at some point, this change in the provincial policy statements. I mean, I haven't absorbed it. The changes in the Aggregate Resources Act, I'm always suspicious when the government starts changing that, but I do not understand what I'm looking at here. Has Don Sinclair, is he off the Police Services Board?
I was going to raise that.
Oh, okay. And like, there's just a whole bunch of things in Schedule A, but
The PPS stuff we always plan to bring back. We just want to let you know that it's out there and done.
Yeah, I'll bring back a report. I did one back on for the October 8th session last year for council.
Okay.
So this builds on that. The key focus is to try and streamline more, and then, of course, a lot of it's about housing supply. But,
current government
I won't
uses the
burn
word
you right now.
streamline, I get very suspicious. The other thing I wanted to say is I did appreciate the notes we're getting from the TRCA meeting. I thought that's useful. We hadn't received them in the past, but I'll just leave it at that, Your Worship. 'Cause
Okay.
There's too much in there to talk about today.
Okay,
Your
John?
Worship, can you come back to me for a minute?
Sure.
I just wanted to compliment Mark on pursuing the issue of the cannabis activity. That's there's no zoning or no request for a permit there, and he's got a very nice letter from the MP Carl Seaback to try and get some movement from Ottawa. Thanks, Mark.
John, did you have it?
Just picking up on that, my understanding is that there is a registry online. A little hard to find, a little hard to maneuver around, that will indicate whether or not a medical license has been granted associated with that property. So that explains why I was asking whether we have a name on title or a business name, and I think I'll try and follow up on that.
Yeah, and my concern on this one is that it's not a formal license that's been issued by the feds. It's a group of 4 personal allowances that someone is doing that they're allowed to do, and that may not be licensed, and that's what I'm trying to get out
Well,
of it.
I think that might present some legal issues if in fact that's the way it's being done. It sounds like one of those U-brews to me. I have one item 23 which pertains to Don Sinclair. It is correct that he has not been reappointed by the province to the Police Service Board, leading us to wonder whether they are trying to slim things down to amalgamate into a detachment board. Now, there was a meeting scheduled for Aurelia a couple of weeks ago that no one could attend, frankly, because of the weather. And the topic of that meeting was the structure, the governance of police service boards. So that was the last of a number of roundtables that the province scheduled. And I wrote to them to say, please, reschedule this meeting because Dufferin County has a lot to say to you about the model of police governance, especially because of the OPP's involvement now with Orangeville and potentially Shelburne. There's a strong feeling both in Orangeville and I think here that we need to retain the status quo, at least in the interim, so that the Police Service Board doesn't get completely subsumed with transitional issues with Orangeville and potentially with Shelburne. I have not heard back from any of the officials that I wrote to with regard to that request to reschedule, and I'm going to follow up on that.
On the appointment, I did contact the appointment branch, and I spoke with the appointment coordinator, asking them to expedite the replacement, tried to see what I could generate from that perspective, and I got a polite, we're looking into it, and you will hear as soon as we appoint someone.
Okay, so if there's nothing further, we have a motion that we accept Schedule A to this agenda. Could I have a mover? Nix, and seconded by Creelman. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so reports of staff and council. So, Mr. Aluka.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of things. Our auditors are coming in a couple of weeks to do the year-end audit for 2019, so Treasury Department's preparing for them. And at the next council meeting, Mr. Will McKay from CIBC Wood Gundy will be here to present the investment report. And I know council always enjoys his presentation.
Thank you, Les. I'll try to go quickly here, just a few things. So I will be bringing a report for the PPS 2020. There's also matters on the regulation from the ARA, the Agri Resource Act. There's a report I brought back last year, you recall, with the Act. That was the Schedule 15 in Bill 108. So this is a follow-up on the technical data. I'll get that to you. There are commenting periods due from March 30th. That's my target date. We've got Full Throttle, which is up on 89 by 3rd, coming to council on the 24th. So council will have a chance to review that bylaw. Post PAC meeting, PANAC meeting. There's also a microbrew proposal that's coming to PANAC for March the 24th, same as council day. The Taoism site is going to have an open house. This is a request from the NEC regarding updated phasing information. That will be on March 31st on the Taoism site. Any final comments will feed into a report I'll bring back to council, I think, Feng Loi Clock site, yeah, I call it Taoism, yeah, Taoism Institute, it's just easier for me to say that. And there will be a report coming back to council on that. We have another site plan wrapping up on Highway 10 that's been a bit of a hiatus, that's the RV place, so that should wrap up shortly. The Dufferin County official plan update, as you probably know, had some further review this past 2 weeks. March 3rd, there was a local planners meeting. That same night, there was a charrette at Menorah, so I attended both. There's a Section 26. This is a key meeting under the Planning Act for that review on March 12th. I'm going to do my best to bring back an accessory bylaw. I don't know if that'll hit the 24th of March or not, but it will shortly thereafter if it can't make the 24th, because I know the 24th is a full agenda. I think that's about it for me.
Okay. Mike, is there anything more?
I think we're good. I think we covered off a lot of it. Council will know that their potholes are in full season, so reverse speed bump, speed control.
Yeah.
Slow down people.
Okay. Kim?
Just bringing council.
Can you use the mic?
Just bring council up to date as to what's happening at the halls. At Mono Center, we're finishing off finally the LED lighting in the lower south room. We've put in a new ceiling, a false ceiling up there, so we've got LED pot lights in. They're great. Most of the work was done in-house by Dave Makowski, and then we did bring in the electrician to finally get the pot lights put in. So that just about completes our LED lighting. Next upcoming project will be replacing the deck boards at Menorah, trying to get those done before the summer season is upon us. Next program coming up is in celebration of Mom's Day, and we will be doing another wine and paint night at Menorah on May the 7th. And tomorrow, I'll be holding a staff meeting with the rec staff just to make sure that in connection with the coronavirus, et cetera, that our cleaning procedures are up to snuff as far as disinfecting high-touch areas, that all of those things are being washed down with a detergent and then disinfected with bleach. So just going to go over all the cleaning procedures as far as that is concerned in respect of the coronavirus. Oh, and one other thing is, I know some staff here at the office have been asking me to get additional bottles of the Purell or the sanitizer, and I've contacted all of my suppliers, and they will not sell any Purell. They have it, but it's all being given to medical facilities.
So I understand that there's a recipe that you can make your own.
I saw that.
There's just made an offer there for you.
Yeah.
Mr. Simpson?
Okay. Want to remind council that nominations for Senior of the Year need to be submitted to the province by April 30th. So I'm going to suggest or recommend that we actually put a notice out to that effect that we will receive them in-house until a point in April. And then I could bring those to council in April, that council can then, if they feel one is suitable, and then we could have it submitted in time.
Sounds good.
So if that's amenable, I'll carry on with that.
Yep.
The spring newsletter is going to go out a little bit early this spring so that Mono on a Bike can be captured. So if you have any input or suggestions, because we are, of course, love to get council's articles in the newsletter as well, please have those to Andrew by April 16th. And finally, we have our new customer comment feedback up at the top of the landing, where there are, you can't see them in the picture very well, but there are cards, pens, and everything else. So we are now have another means. This was an action item on the Citizen Engagement Action Plan, so we're keeping on top of that and advancing, and I'll have other website sites that are coming live, which I'll talk about at another meeting.
On the 2nd, John and I met with the county servicing review team. They've asked for some additional information. Just so council's aware, they are looking at a joint council meeting. They're to present the results. They were looking at mid-May, and I don't think there was any resolution of that. I think they were going to push later in May or early June. So be aware that that's going to be a request coming from them. On the 3rd, we also met with the county on the emergency management plan. The county's, the draft has been completed based on the comments that were made at that meeting. It will be coming back to your March 24th meeting because the county wants it approved at all of the local levels before it gets dealt with at county council. And then finally, I reported out to you, I attended a pandemic planning exercise with the health unit and the various hospitals and medical community in Dufferin, and that was also in the afternoon. It was very, it was an eye-opener for me, being not part of the medical community in town. And I think one of the main issues coming out of that was that there needs to be one primary comment being provided from our local health practitioners and the health unit in the hospital on coronavirus, and the health unit agreed to take that lead. Now, I haven't seen anything come from it as of yet. I anticipate they'll be posting on their website. So
that's an educational type, sorry, through you, Mayor. That's an educational comment or a policy?
Common, the coming from the health unit, the one-pager is common messaging actually on the coronavirus.
Okay.
All of the various parties have different messaging that they want to see, including Ontario Health, that is different than even our local health unit. So they're trying to coordinate that. One of the components was there's a report that they put out, and they update it regularly on their website. It's about 10 pages long with all the stats and everything. And it was found that that wasn't even being dealt with by some in the medical community, because it was just too much, and just give it to us in a page and let us know what we're to do, kind of thing. So, and there was up until then, there's really been no link between them all. So it served as a really good opening for the health unit to work with all those partners to ensure that everybody is on the same page.
Is there some thinking that we need to do as a town in terms of how we would function if public meetings were deemed not to be held, how we do council meetings and other things? Have you given that some thought?
I've thought about it. I mean, the numbers they're talking about now are 1,000. At some of the other times, I hadn't. No one got into that during the discussions. I think it was a little premature. I mean, even that was last week. So this is changing, daily. So.
Meaning, do you know what you'd do if you were asked to close? How it would function?
In terms of a business continuity plan, that's something we're trying to put together. So.
So Ralph, did you have anything to report?
Well, I've been attending a lot of meetings. It's been a bit much, although I've enjoyed them mostly. I attended the ALPHA meeting, which is the Association of Public Health Units in Toronto. A great talk by the cybercrime head of Ontario Provincial Police, Barbara Yaffe, the Deputy Minister of Health. She spoke about coronavirus. Most of what she said is now history. We had a great talk about change management from a Tim person. I can't remember his last name. We attended the Board of Health meeting last week. One of the major parts of it was the communication and what's happening and what we should be planning on. The Board of Health is amazingly capable of responding to issues. They had a problem with a nail salon in Guelph, where there was a contamination with hepatitis C. And this contamination has probably been going on for some time. So it's a widely visited nail salon. Hundreds, maybe more, of people had attended it. They wanted to bring everybody in who had been there and test their for hep C antibodies and give them some education. And the day I got there was one day after this thing had blown open, and they had 400 people that they saw in the afternoon and dealt with respect to drawing blood and running. I'm very impressed with this health unit. They also have about 10 people on the phone or answering the phone for inquiries, mainly about COVID-19. I did attend the Headwaters Farm and Whatever Alliance meeting on Friday. It was quite good. It was really about soil regeneration and the way that 3 farmers in our area or north of us were doing their organic farming and the things that challenged them and how they were handling it. And it was quite well enjoyed. There were 5 people from the pollinator garden who were there. We had our AGM for the pollinator garden yesterday, and we'll be going ahead with, I think, quite an interesting program this year. And it's notable that you can work in the pollinator garden and cannot be a part of don't need to be a part of a group, so that maybe the virus won't affect us much. Anyway, and I'll be bringing a report for last year to council here in due course. And that's it. Otherwise, yeah, that's fine.
Just really quickly, thanks to Kim, I was going to do a class for Big Brothers, Big Sisters of cross-country ski lessons. That was the night of the snowstorm, and they canceled on me, but thanks for the town accommodating that. They probably the one that's given me not a lot of trouble, but a bit of difficulty, and I reported it to you earlier, is the Shelburne District Fire Board. As you know, our agreement dates back to 1991. We developed a new agreement, and the CAOs of all the municipalities took a look at it and cleaned it up. 4 municipalities passed it. The town of Shelburne did not. The town of Shelburne has come back to the board several times. At our last meeting on March the 3rd, there was a new draft proposal in front of us. I had assumed it had been prepared by Shelburne, but I guess I was wrong because the 2 Shelburne reps looked at it and said there's no way Shelburne Council is going to approve this. It would have in effect given the voting structure of 3 votes to Shelburne and 8 to the other 4 municipalities. So 3 out of 11 votes. They just said that's not acceptable. So they're going to take it back again, once again, and rewrite it, and it'll come back with Shelburne having 6 votes out of 14, which is 42 and some odd %. I don't have a particular difficulty with what Shelburne wants. They now, last year, they're paying 52% of the freight. By this coming year, they'll be paying 55% of the freight. That's based on the formula. My difficulty is Shelburne wants this agreement rewritten like this, and then looks at us as board members like I'm supposed to come back to Mono Council and advocate for them. I'm not going to do that. I don't have a problem with what Shelburne's asking for, but I think the proper structure is for Shelburne to approach each of the 4 councils and say, this is what we want. As a board member, I don't agree or disagree with the agreement. It's the councils that do. March the 4th, that wasn't too important. I went to Blue Mountain. I just wanted to tell some of my aged friends here, I did 31 runs down Black Diamond and double Black Diamond runs, and my top speed was 66 kilometers an hour, which isn't bad for a guy in his mid-70s.
I'll tell you, Fred, that 2 weeks before, I raced in the 27-kilometer Loppet in Ottawa and had a best time in 2 years.
Were you doing 66 kilometers an hour? No, I was doing.
Probably far in excess of that of the downhills.
Tonight, I will be representing the town of Mono at, I'm getting the name wrong, Dufferin Caledon Climate Action Group. There's going to be a panel discussion on what we are all doing with respect to climate change. Caledon, Mono, Dufferin County, and Orangeville will be on the panel. To make sure I represent Mono properly, I've actually prepared a small paper. I'm not going to read it, but I wanted to make sure I got my facts right. Ralph, I actually thank you, some staff, Mike and Fred Simpson and others, I can't remember. Les helped me, I think, with a few numbers, and Ralph reviewed my paper. I think it'll be in the next agenda package. If anyone is really eager to see what I'm going to be saying, I could email them a copy of the paper, but it will go public at some point.
I have a short-term memory. I wanted to tell you that I'd met with Guy Gardhouse, and we met with Sylvia Jones and had a very fruitful meeting, I think. The issue was what should be done about the proposed merger of our health unit. It's proposed that we merge with Peel, Halton, and Waterloo. It's fairly obvious to most of us that that's not a good merger, and we presented our thoughts on what the problems were with it and recommended an alternative. And the recommendation is not private. It's that we continue with the same health unit that we have in its present structure, but that we have some administrative joined together in some administrative functions, particularly back office functions with Grey Bruce. Privacy, cyber security, research, these things, but that we maintain the same health units we have here and that Dufferin would stay with them. So that's the current thinking, and that everybody who's involved in the hospitals and Sonia, et cetera, they're behind this.
Ralph, did you want that presentation that you gave to me put on the Schedule A to the next council meeting? I wasn't sure what you wanted. Okay, that's fine. I didn't know what you wanted me to do with it, so that's all.
I asked Sylvia when I gave it to her whether I could share it with other people, and she said, fine. I think I specified a few people like them. So I think not to the whole public.
So after the last meeting where we set the town hall and we're looking for topics for the agenda, I did discuss with Scott Burns, Director of Infrastructure at the county, and he said because of the review of waste management services and ongoing contracts, it would probably be a good thing for them to be involved because there's going to be requests for public input. So he's talking with his staff and will get back to us as to what it is that he can provide. Okay.
The only thing I had to report was the item I already touched upon, the meeting in Aurelia, as well as Don Sinclair's appointment.
Okay. So now we've got notices of motion. So John, you've got...
Okay, I'll read really quickly. Notice of motion, whereas the Town of Mono's procurement bylaw dates from 2004, and whereas Mono ratepayers expect the municipality to source and purchase products and services in the most transparent and responsible fashion, therefore be it resolved that, subject to prioritization by Council of Bylaw review and reform, that Mono's procurement bylaw be reviewed and revised by town staff and council. And that's a tip of the hand to Mark's plea that we sit down at some point and give direction as to the priority of bylaw review and so forth as to what we want to see top of the list as opposed to bottom of the list.
Excuse me, can I ask a question? Aren't we reviewing all of our bylaws this year? What is your motion? I mean, your motion is picking out one bylaw and saying we should review it, but aren't we reviewing all of them this year?
Every single one? That's news to me.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
I asked at a previous council meeting.
To priority.
Give us some priority, because we've got a lot on our plate right now and trying to
Yeah.
figure out
Oh, I see.
what
So-
you want coming forward. So I think John's just saying bring the procurement bylaw forward,
Okay.
and it's a dated bylaw.
Second notice of motion that Mono Council's procedural bylaw be amended to clarify that any member of council may request an item or issue be added to unfinished business and deferred items, 4.2, subsection 6, order of business, and that such item or issue remain on future council agendas until a majority of council indicates by vote that the item or issue has been addressed. This is going back to something that we've done in the past, where we've had ongoing issues to simply stay on the agenda until they're dealt with as a sort of a memo to file, as it were.
Microphone.
Way of creating an action list?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Next motion, notice of motion that a detailed and itemized invoices for all work done by R.J. Burnsides on a bylaw to regulate site alteration and movement of fill within the town of Mono be presented to Mono Council for consideration at its next meeting. That was alluded to earlier. Next notice of motion, and I'll make all these available to Fred after the meeting. Whereas there is no automatic provision within Mono's procedural bylaw 2004 for periodic review and evaluation of professional services such as legal, engineering, and accounting, and whereas accounting services were the subject of a relatively recent review and procurement process in contrast to legal and engineering services, therefore it be resolved that requests for proposal be prepared for legal and engineering services for the town of Mono, and that RFPs for legal and engineering services be published and or circulated to potential providers of these services with the view to being considered and awarded prior to December 31st. In the event of a change in supplier, open files as of that date would remain with the current supplier of service until completion, and that's to ensure continuity.
Can I ask a question? You've got legal, engineering services, on that. Why wouldn't you include water services?
I'm happy to accept water as one, yes, good point. And I specifically excluded accounting because apparently that has been dealt with in recent memory. Notice of motion, whereas it's desirable to receive committee minutes when considering recommendations of those committees, and whereas committees do not necessarily meet to approve their minutes in time for council's consideration of recommendations that flow from a meeting, therefore be it resolved that if a committee's recommendation comes to council prior to the formal approval of the minutes, that draft minutes be circulated to the committee for approval and inclusion on the council agenda along with any recommendations, and that our procedural bylaw be amended accordingly. That has actually happened in the instance of our planning committee. I think we just need to formalize the fact that draft minutes can come to council, so we have the benefit of those minutes as we're considering a recommendation of the committee. And my final motion is, whereas the Town of Mono's policy and procedure for job evaluation, performance and review, and salary administration approved by council on October 25th, 2016 requires that all employees, quote, all employees will have a formal performance evaluation conducted at a minimum annually by their supervisor. Therefore, be it resolved that council ensures adherence to this policy and that all evaluations occur on or before May 1st, 2020, if they have not already been done. And that's it.
Okay. So if there's no, okay. Is there any other business anybody can think of? Okay, so we are going to be moving in camera, so I have to wait until Fred gets back, I guess.
It's funny.
Correct. We're going to move in camera. The council move into a closed meeting pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended at 1:07 for personal matter about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees' job evaluations. And 2, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, potential legal action against town, bylaw enforcement, site alteration. So could I have a mover? Moved by Nix and seconded by Manctalo. All in favor?
Can I just have a couple minutes to make sure I have everything turned off now?
Yep.
Yeah, keep that light still on.
I got the rise report.
Okay, and we are back.
Okay. And so, Mark, are you correcting a?
As quickly as I can. Ed Craker, Mr. Craker, resident.
What do you want his name listed, or do you
Maybe
want
not
just a
list the
resident?
name.
2A resident.
I know, so you didn't do it, so it's, we made a mistake.
And I agree. No.
You're gonna lose quorum really quickly.
If I have to stay, you have to stay. That we rise from in-camera session and report that council does not support payment of fees to a resident for involvement in the preparation of the fill bylaw. So moved by Nix and seconded by Manctalo. And all in favor? Opposed? Thank you. So That carries. So now we're into that we introduce and give the necessary readings to a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Mildred, Session 4-2020, held on March 10th, 2020, that it be signed by the mayor and the clerk, sealed and engrossed in the bylaw book. Moved by Creelman, seconded by Manktolo. All in favor? And that we adjourn at 1:48 PM. Moved by Nix and seconded by Manktolo. All in favor?
Bye, everyone.
Okay, see you for